set?
Yep, you're good.
Okay, we'll call the meeting to order. First item on the agenda is public comment.
Hi, Sarah McSweeney.
Come on up and sit down.
Oh, sure. Hi, good evening. I'm Sarah McSweeney, 14 Summer Street, Cohasset. And the objective of my comments this evening are to bring to your attention a pretty important matter that a group of us sitting in the audience, and we represent, quite frankly, a large number of concerned parents, so we're speaking on their behalf. The issue that we want to talk about this evening is in regards to the upcoming school budget for next year. And over the past several months, we've been attending a number of sessions with school committee members, school administration, the advisory meetings, and most recently the budget planning meeting that took place last Thursday. And what we're really wanting to get right on your radar screen front and center is a couple things. One, the school district enrollment has increased by 108 students over the past 2 years, which is 1,638 students. The overall enrollment over the past 4 years has increased 10%, with the increase being particularly sharp in 2013 and 2014. The enrollment growth, however, has outpaced the budget growth over the past 3 years. And by the way, we're happy to hand out the documentation that I'm referring to for you to review after the meeting.
Yes.
Absolutely, we think it's really important.
I haven't gotten that at any meeting.
Sure, this is data that we've spent quite a number of man hours collecting, but happy to share it. We want to be really transparent in the process, as I know you do as well.
Thank you.
So, Diane, welcome. I was just summarizing. That's okay.
Chit-chatting with somebody
No,
downstairs.
not a problem. Just surmising where we are and what we're talking about this evening. So, as I mentioned, the enrollment growth has outpaced the budget growth year over year for the last 3 out of the 4 budget cycles. And why we want to flag this to you, the advisory board, the budget planning committee, the school committee, we're meeting with Christina tomorrow morning to talk more in detail about it, is that as we've been hearing about the town budget, and I'm going to get to that in a moment, we want to make sure this is front and center. Why we're particularly concerned is last Thursday at the budget advisory committee, we saw and started to hear about some pretty significant changes for the 2015 forecast. And we're really concerned because we're obviously pretty late into the process, and to make changes in the budget, and not just the numeric changes I'm talking about, but really the strategic changes that you're talking about this late in the process causes us some pretty big concern. A couple of things that we want to highlight about that. Right now, Barbara and her team have done a lot of work and been vigilant about crunching the numbers and are putting forward a budget number of $804,000 increase for the next upcoming school year. The draft budget that we heard from Chris and your team has a couple of things that make us concerned. One is we saw about a $400,000 increase in town expenses that include public road repairs of $150,000, facilities upgrade of $150,000, and a stabilization fund. Those expenses are now showing in your operating budget, those capital expenses, and the reason we're worried about those and want to talk more about those is because that's eating right into the school administration number that we're putting forward, or that Barbara and her team are putting forward. The other thing that we saw on there was the local receipt number has a pretty significant decrease off of the 3.9 number and also the forecasted number from 3.6. And it looks like it's hovering around 3.4. And please, jump in if there's something that you have a question about or concern. Excuse me. In addition, the health insurance number shows a $150,000 increase which is a 9.6% increase as well. And that's a big number. We think we should look at that and just kind of doing some due diligence around surrounding towns. Some of the other surrounding towns aren't seeing such a big increase. I'm sure there's a reason why, but we think we should flag it. Maybe that business should be shocked, but more to follow there. The 804 number, which we're really focusing on because Barbara and her team want to move forward with that, and the school committee is Representative Paul's behind me, obviously, and we spent quite a bit of time with them. I know they're preparing to vote on that, but the understanding we have and the expectation is that they will vote to move forward with that. A couple of things I think should be flagged with that. One is half of that number is contractual salary increases. So that's not arbitrary spending and the nice to haves. That we call those non-negotiables. If you're in the contract, you can't negotiate them. The second is, and some of you may or not be aware, but there's a replacement of the reserve fund for $229,000 that had to be used last year to fund an additional kindergarten teacher. Why was it funded late in the process? Because of the explosive growth. So that has to be put back. And then the last 173 is the additional headcount to meet enrollment at the middle high school and the kindergarten and keeping the existing staff. So we talk about level services. what she's putting forward is that, but you can't have level service without staffing additional headcount to solve for the growing enrollment problem. So, I know we have a short window for public comment, but this is a really, really important issue. Martha's been at every meeting where there's been massive participation from parents, massive discussion around it, and I just wanna make sure that this is on your radar, front and center. We're gonna get a lot of visibility around this in the next, short of 60 days as we move to town meeting. But parents have asked us on one of the presidents of the PSO to come forward and make sure that everybody here knows about it, the school committee knows about it. We wanna have real transparency in that process, rather than, hey, I thought someone said. This is a very, very important issue. Happy to take questions, but I wanna make sure that this is on everyone's radar, and we look forward to spending time with Chris tomorrow morning to talk more in detail.
And I just want to follow up and say that I've been very happy and excited to have these conversations, and one of the things that I'm working to do is be as transparent with some of these numbers as I can, and I'm still learning, okay, I'm still learning the numbers and trying to get them out. And for example, one of the numbers you put out was the health insurance. I mean, I literally got that number last Thursday, and that came straight from Maya, and the initial call was, Chris, I just want to tell you. It was like, oh, what are you about to tell me? And they, they said, well, your underlying rating was actually a 17% increase. I said, well, that's great, but 9.8 is a pretty big number, and why? And believe me, I've asked the same question. I said, I gotta understand this better, and we have to talk about this more. And it's not, I mean, I'm not happy with it at all. The reality is that's the bill that was literally we were hit with on Thursday. And again, I've politely, directly requested that they give me every possible answer and what we could do to mitigate that. So believe me, that's like very, very, very high on the radar screen. But it did happen, it did come in. And, if the increase, and again, I agree that they're different, and again, we can talk about this more tomorrow, but just so people understand, we're not in, the way that Maya works is we're not in a big giant, we're in a big pool, we're in a little pool of our own as well. And that's just, and again, this is something that predates me. So we're rated in a big pool, but also against ourselves. So the bigger pool helps mitigate the increase, but it's unlike some other plans where we're part of a much, much larger pool. So everyone shares the same increase or decrease. That's not the way Maya works. And again,
We also realized almost no increase last year, so, and I don't know the exact numbers, but where some might be going up 5-6% a year, we had like a 0% or a 1% last year, so I have a feeling that we're playing a little bit of catch up on that.
I mean, I did ask that very bluntly.
Hey, listen, we're all, two things. One is, we wanna support you, right? We wanna support our school administration, we wanna support you. You're new on the job, we know it's hard, you're, 60 days in, and we are marching towards a hard stop on April 28th, right? That's another non-negotiable. So we wanna support you, happy to work with you, but these are really thorny and complex issues, and the issue of increasing enrollment is not going away. And it isn't going away because you know what's going on with Toll Brothers, you see the building permits. That problem isn't going away, so we have to solve for it together, right? Collectively, all the key stakeholders. You're one set, the school committee, the administration. We want to be fiscally responsible, right? We know that there's not an open-ended checkbook, but these issues aren't going away.
For what it's worth, it's important to realize a couple of things. If this had been even 3 years ago or 4 years ago, the discussion probably wouldn't be happening because the folks in the audience would have been royally disengaged. So actually it's a way of saying thank you for being engaged. The other piece of that is that 3 years ago, we were struggling to close a gap in the budget that shouldn't have existed in the first place. It did. And the town went forward and adopted some very specific principles for managing themselves. The most important thing that the Board of Selectmen can do to support the schools is to provide a reliable, transparent source of funding that can be counted upon on a regular basis. And of course, the most important thing that the school committee and the administration can do is take those funds and administer them in the most effective manner possible. So we hear you, but keep in mind that while this is a discussion, the fact is that our process that was developed as part of those agreements is ongoing at the moment. We have not yet even viewed a budget. It hasn't been created yet. So the budget planning process is a critical function in which much of this is supposed to be hashed out publicly. And that's, you know, I can understand, especially as parents with kids in the schools, you're looking at it and saying, well, you know, I can't believe this discussion is taking place. And we might be shortchanged with regard to how we're going to be funded. But the facts remain, as you said, we are a town of limited resources, and we attempt to deal with that. You're right, the enrollment has outpaced budget growth, but budget growth on the school side has consistently been driven by both the union contracts as well as mandates that are put upon the local district by the state and by the feds, and the costs are left to us to bear. We've got to make it work. We recognize that, but please be patient, be participative, continue to be participative in the process, but remember, we don't even have a budget yet.
Well, two comments. I think it's great to be early in the process, because if you have this conversation late in the process when the budgets are final and inked, then it's way too late, which I think is unfortunately what happened with the kindergarten teacher last year. It was very late, and it was a bit of a fire drill to solve for that. One other comment is certainly as a parent with students in the school system, I am invested, but I think let's not forget that everybody who lives in this town has a vested interest in the schools, because that's a major reason and a key component of what drives our property values. So we want to protect our investment. That's really important, right? And happy to continue to participate. We plan on doing that, and getting it on your radar early is really important. Lastly, I do understand your comment around the state mandates. We've actually asked for visibility and clarification into how much money has been spent on things like the core curriculum, because again, those are what we call non-negotiables. We have to do those.
No choice.
So let's make sure we flag to people what that is, rather than it looks like this arbitrary big number and increase. Because union contracts, core curriculum, those things are non-negotiable. Lastly, I'm glad you brought up the I guess kind of your governance model for the budget process, and we did review that around maintaining the stabilization fund, the AAA bond rating, right? We're really looking at this more broadly. This is not looking at an isolation for the school folks, but again, when we talk about town-wide services, keeping a level service budget, in order to do that, you can't ignore what the growth is, because that goes hand in hand.
It's good timing to discuss that, but keep in mind that one of the things that the board recognized in Chris's candidacy was looking at budgets beyond level services. In fact, there's a very good argument that says you take level services and toss it right out the window, and everybody competes for the budget and says, well, what is it as a result? What is it that you value, and where do we invest? Okay, so right now, we're still living with status quo, level services. But the same argument could be put to every single function and department of the town. Do we need to do that? Do we need to do that? Could that be done differently? And as a result, it could reorder the priorities and therefore reorder the financing that goes into any given department or any given function. Likewise, we could all learn to do things much more efficiently and maybe produce greater services than we currently deliver, simply because we're more efficient with the dollars that we spend.
Sure.
So those are some of the challenges that we face, and my kids have, like yours, have proceeded through the schools. I still have one who's pulling up the rear as a sophomore, and so it's certainly within my interest as well. And everybody who sits at the table here recognizes the value that our small school district makes on our small town. So I truly mean it. I personally, and I think the board as well, appreciates the fact that we have folks like you who are willing to get engaged, and thank you.
Right?
Martha?
Yes,
Yes.
what's happening now, because I've been watching the enrollment, we're having a 50-year swing now. 50 years ago, we had increasing enrollment, and what's going on here now, because 50 years later, everybody's having kids that were born 50 years at that time. So, we're going to have increasing enrollment for some time, and we're going to have to look at budget priorities and so forth. I agree with your analysis, and Steve did say we were lucky through several years to be able to do level funding and so forth. But we may have to do some as he said, we may have to do some creative funding, but we will, but, I recognize that you need the money because you have, it's a pendulum down at the upper, there's nothing, and you have the bulge coming up and you're needing more and you're, coming up. The largest class for my children are 175 kids. We had almost 2,000 kids and we had to use, for kindergartens 1 year, they divided the room at First Parish Church for a year. And then it started to go down and it did go down. Now it's going up again and we're gonna, and particularly with all the mandates, we're gonna have to find out, more money for schools.
And Steve, I think your point's well taken, right? Every company, and quite frankly, every household is doing the same thing, which are, what are your priorities, and how do we manage more responsibly, right? Because everybody, we were all around in 2007 and 2000, those are tough years. But I think, let's bear in mind that process probably should take place over a long period of time, which is, we have the hard stop that's coming on town meeting is it's imminent, so we have to decide what the short-term goals are to solve for that, and I agree with the longer term, to look at that more broadly across. You should look at your whole portfolio and say, what's the funding, what are the services, where can we find better efficiencies and expenses?
The difficulties we face and the reality, and I'll wrap up with this, is that the maximum that we can increase annually is 2.5%. But the increases from different departments can vary. The town side of the budget has averaged about 1.5 over the past 10 years. That's not been the case for the contributions that the school district has required. It has grown far in excess of what the town can traditionally increase rates. And again, that's simply, it is what it is. That growth rate is reflective of all of the things we just talked about, whether they be mandates, rising costs of employment, OPEB, et cetera. And in fact, the school budget doesn't really comprise what the spending on the schools is. Because the town picks up a variety of other things that add about, I think, $7.5 million to the actual expense that goes into schools.
Sure, we recognize
No,
the shared
no,
expense.
it's not a tit for tat thing, it's
Yeah.
an acknowledgement of the
Yeah.
proportion of value that the town places on the district. And that's an important recognition as well. When I talk about efficiencies, it's, there's the business side that looks at efficiencies and says, oh, how can we squeeze more profit out of this? Well, in the world of municipal finance, efficiency means how can we deliver more with the same amount of money? Because the municipality lives and breathes to spend every dime that it gets its hands on, because that's its job. But spending that dime brings efficiency out in what it delivers to you, the education that your child receives, excuse me, the response from fire, police, ambulance, DPW, that's what it's there for. And so our role, we hope, is to set objectives for the town as a whole and help to put in place strategies that will allow those dollars to be spent and maximized for the benefit of all of us.
Great, I didn't, my perception, nor do I think any parents it was a use or lose mentality, right? We don't think that's how you approach the funding, so that's great to hear it again, but that's
Let
what
me
we certainly
just say a
hope to
couple of points. I think the whole town should note that in this last recession, Cohasset was probably the only community in the state of Massachusetts that didn't lose property values. We maintain our property values where other places dropped down.
Sure,
And I think a lot of us attribute that to the great school system we have.
agreed.
50 years ago, I was in 7th grade up there. Both my daughters went through here, so I've been through both sides of it as a parent and going
I'm
through
glad
it myself.
I was behind you, 40-something
So-
years ago I was up there, so.
Were you?
Yes.
Okay, so, and my class was 100, so I don't know what they're
101.
coming at. One of the things I think that we hear clearly is that the final enrollment numbers we aren't gonna know until September or October, and there's an unknown there that's gotta be dealt with.
That's
And
correct.
Chris is looking at some creative ways to be able to put some money away for that, if it's needed, to say, here it is, and so, that's one of the things we're looking at.
We recognize that, so we can help you get visibility and some historic trends in the enrollment numbers, because we've got, and I must give all the credit to Katie Dugan, because she's the financial brain binding
Wonk.
operation. But we have lots of numbers in it, and we also have historic trends that will affect what goes on in the summer, right? Because a lot of home buyers come in the spring,
Yeah.
get their kids in the summer and enroll. What our concern is around that rainy day fund, or I'm not sure how you're gonna deem it, is we need to think long and hard about that, because what Barbara's put forward is keeping the class size at a manageable size, not a nice to have, at a manageable size,
Yeah.
with very, 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 very little room for headroom. So if we have a number of kids come in a particular grade, she's gonna bump into that threshold, which that speaks to the
No one
contract.
wants, right.
The concern about having a fund just in case, two things. One is, if we're midway through a third grade year, or a fifth grade year, or seventh grade, it doesn't matter what year it is, and then we say, okay, now we're gonna inject another head count in there, you've already lost a portion of that year, and you can't get that back, right? We can't start seventh grade over. So we'd like to do much more due diligence and get ahead of that, than rather than say, the building's on fire, now we need to add a teacher, or a half a head, or an aide in January. That's just not, that's,
Well, and teachers and staff should be in the operating budget. So
Absolutely.
it's whether there's other
Right.
things
So
that,
we would, if you need a teacher, we'd give it to you for September, not January.
that's exactly
That's
what
right.
we're expecting.
Well, yeah, that isn't even a discussion necessary to have.
So for
It'll be very-
them to move forward, they'll have the staffing, the
That's
numbers,
right.
and they'll have hired and filled and be
Well, they would
locked
know
and
at
loaded
the
for
end of
September 1st.
August what's going on. I mean, I know you do the count in October, but we would know that, because they're, particularly the kindergarten, they were getting numbers, they gave the numbers the other night.
Yeah, the kindergarten numbers are sitting at 98 right now for enrollment for March 1st, which is up not 10x, but 5x from what it normally is historically.
Well, the fact that it's up, it sets a trend, usually
Yes.
if you get more.
Right,
sets a
which is
trend.
why Barbara's put forward a budget, which already addresses that, rather than just in case we realize in August, we're trying to get away from that
But you
that
see,
late
you
minute.
have people moving out that had children and
Sure.
retiring, and the houses are being replaced with people with children. And
Yes.
I did some statistical thinking too,
Mm.
talked to some of the realtors. And when we had our classes, that graduated 175, then we had the smaller classes coming. So you see, that was the bulge at the top end, so where the pendulum is going the other way,
Mm.
which I said before.
I just wanna say two quick things. One is, I will be at the budget planning group meeting, despite rumors to the contrary floating throughout
Great.
town, so. But the other thing is, this kind of conversation, budget conversation, we are up against the clock. We've gotten a budget together in a shorter period of time, but it has to continue, so that next year, next fall, we don't end up, up against the wall with whether to have a special town meeting to deal with extra money. So, I think it's important, we used to have once a month kind of finance meetings, and it's probably just something to once we get through town meeting, to revisit whether, not just current operating budget, but keep this long-term, this long-range, this policy conversation ongoing, so that, next year we have a lot more breathing room as we deal with the hard numbers. And to Steve's earlier point, we haven't seen Chris's budget yet, so a lot of these numbers are still kind of floating out there, but.
Yeah, two things. One is the numbers we're talking about were discussed at the budget planning session last Thursday. And secondly, I couldn't agree more with the long-range forecasting.
gotta
That was
keep
the
it
issue that
going.
we flagged at the school, which is you have to be able to forecast and use your historic data to forecast forward.
Absolutely.
Otherwise, we're gonna be having
And
the same
make your
conversation in
case.
a year.
It
And
helps
that's-
you, right.
And that's
You gotta know what
expensive,
your
and I don't
needs
mean
are.
expensive in money, it's time expensive.
Absolutely.
There's a lot of energy right now being spent in these discussions, really important and really thorny issues.
Right.
But it would be much more efficient to spend time, and Chris, we're happy to help you
Ongoing.
ongoing to get smarter about it, but the April 28th date is.
Right, well, no, there's two, right, and again, I'll talk a little bit more a little bit later, but I'm looking forward, and again, I've been very grateful for the input, it's exciting.
Yeah.
This is the kind of conversation that I was asked to come and join and help facilitate, I'm looking forward to that. And I do know there's a short-term reality, but the longer term is we need to have these more ongoing conversations. And I've been talking with a lot of folks about that, and I do think, and it's, we're gonna have a meeting in a couple of weeks to talk again more about finances and long-term planning. I think we need to do that. I mean, I think, Cohasset went through a really rough stretch. It's now
Sure.
time to start again with these kind of, and to develop a new model for doing, and again, to look at a whole lot of elements. And I'm looking forward to tomorrow when we're gonna continue the conversation. So,
Mhm.
so thank you.
Great.
Thanks,
Thank you
Sarah.
very much.
Thank you very
Thank you.
much.
Any more public comment? Come on up.
So Katie Dugan, 100 Black Rock Road, mother of a first grader, a fourth grader. And I want to just add 2 points to what Sarah said. So one point that I just want to reemphasize that came up several times in this conversation is that there are 2 things impacting enrollment. One, we have new housing stock in town, and we know that there's more housing stock coming. It's not a forever problem because luckily for us, we have a town that does protect in terms of the number of houses that are going to come into town. But that being said, there's a short-term issue with 41 houses being built at Toll Brothers. I want to reconfirm that the demographic shift that is happening in town is real. I have pulled up 2000 and 2010 census data just to give you a sense. The 5 to 19-year-old age ranges increased from 21.8% in the 2000 census for Cohasset to 25.1% in 2010. I can't speak to what's happened in the last couple of years, but it is clear that is the single biggest age range that has grown, with the other populations shrinking, including our oldest populations in terms of the percent of total
Well, that's
residents.
what I said.
So you've got 2 trends going on, new housing stock plus a shift in demographics. Because we are a healthy real estate market and we are an attractive town to move into, it's exactly what Martha referred to. There are people leaving and there are new families coming in, so we're getting additional headcount. So I don't think we should just focus on the fact that we have new housing stock, but we also have to face the reality that our demographic trends are trending younger. And that is going to, both of those are going to continue to drive a discussion around enrollment. The second thing I wanted to mention is I really appreciate the fact that the Selectmen took a time to put together 3 pages of budget priorities. I've read them, I understand them, but when you have 3 pages of priorities, there needs to be some weighting of those between short, medium, and long term. If you try and accomplish all of those objectives in the short term, the result is going to be things like your objectives of level services. Granted, we can talk about level services, it's gonna be compromised. You can't weight everything equally in a budget process and expect that you're going to have anything but alphabet soup. And what I would like to do is start a conversation around how do we weight those? Do we have agreement in town? For example, I am fully behind a AAA bond rating for the town. I just don't think that that's something that you're gonna get to next year by saving more. There are other factors qualitatively that are holding us back from a AAA bond rating. So I can appreciate that, that is a lever that we need to continue to monitor, but putting more capital against that at the expense of the schools doesn't necessarily accelerate that objective, and it hurts other objectives. So it's all about understanding what your short, medium, and long term are, having that discussion, which unfortunately we don't have a lot of time to do this year, but starting that conversation now and continuing it is important, because at the end of the day, this has to be a shared vision, and I can get behind a lot of things. I can get behind a triple bond rating, but that should not be our only view of our community. Financial health to me is kind of a given for why I moved to town, and I'm glad that we're back on the right track. But there should be other things that we should share in our vision, and I'd like to see that incorporated into part of what the Selectmen take on. But I appreciate the fact that you put together budget priorities, but accomplishing that all in a single budget cycle is not achievable.
Katie, 2 things, and I can go into it more deeply
Yeah.
than we talk individually. That was the first time in my memory that
Yeah, I know.
the Board of Selectmen actually committed to writing what budget priorities were, and beyond the budget priorities, what the financial priorities were.
Yeah.
And it's not a small thing, because again, 3 years ago, AAA bond rating, we were worried about being knocked down a couple of notches.
Yep.
And that's, I recognize that, especially when you're looking at whether or not you're funding a kindergarten teacher, that AAA bond ratings and such may seem vague and unusual. But again, I go back to the very same thing.
Mm-hmm.
First of all, if you don't set a goal, you'll never achieve it.
Right.
Okay? You fire at anything, and whatever you hit, you just call it a target.
You miss 100% of shots you won't take.
That's right. That's right. The second piece of that is the most important thing that this town, and more importantly, the elected officials at the table currently and in the future, can do for the schools is to provide a solid, stable source of funds, projectable year in and year out.
Right.
And without that, and the AAA actually is less important about borrowing at the moment, but much more important as a statement to how the town manages its finances overall, such that we can do that.
Right.
And we can be that source. So that's really the basis of it. It's, if you will, it's a rallying point. No, we're not gonna get there this year.
Yep.
And I'd love to think we'd get there next year. And actually, interestingly enough, one of the most important pieces in it, in that rating is stability of management.
Yes,
Okay.
out of five
And if we
years
keep,
changing
if
town
we keep
manager.
shooting down the people that we appoint because they're not perfect, because, and instead of guiding them to the bigger and greater capabilities of their profession, then we're probably not gonna have that stability either. So I think it makes great sense for, all of us to think along those lines as to how can we get to those objectives? Look, this being the public comment period is your comment period, not ours.
Yep.
So, I appreciate you entertaining some response.
That's why those things are 3 pages long, it's because he wrote them, but.
So I appreciate, and believe me, I've been involved in more than one credit rating process, so I understand what you're driving towards in terms of objective. I understand what financial stability will bring to the schools, but also appreciate that you can't repeat kindergarten, you can't repeat 4th grade, you can't repeat 5th grade.
I did.
You
All
can,
of
but
them.
it should not be
Not
stated
recommended.
objective.
It's not all right, it's not a
Graduated high school
goal.
at 22.
So, I guess what I'm saying is that, again, going back to the principle of we have short, medium, and long term, we need to have a shared vision, and we need to weight all of those so that what we land out with is a rational discussion about what we're providing to our community.
Karen had a
Yeah,
comment.
Katie, if I might, I'm very glad to hear Sarah say that, we're all part of a community. And I've always felt that it's very important for the Board of Selectmen to understand the challenges facing the school committee and the superintendent. I also feel it's very important for the superintendent, the school committee, and the school population to understand that the town faces some similar challenges. And it's really encouraging to hear that people are willing to work together to open up these honest lines of communication. And the only other thing I'll say is in regard to the financial policies, I think you'll find, and you probably heard at the meeting the other night, that the budget planning meeting, that there were some differences of opinion as to priorities. And I think that you'll find when this board discusses it, when the advisory board discusses it, that there will be differences of opinion within the different boards. And we will, take direction from our financial team, from our town manager. But I think that you're going to find it isn't a slam dunk, that there's going to be a lot of discussion, and that there are a lot of challenges that need to be met within the community as far as funding goes. So with an open mind and open communications, I think we can get there together in a partnership.
Here's what I would ask. I would ask the following of the selectmen, that you weigh in at, when you do receive a budget, about how those guidelines are being prioritized and balanced. I would also ask you that you weigh in, now that we have Chris Senior on board for the next 3 years, that we drive a budget timeline and discussion that doesn't put us in this position again next year. I cannot reemphasize enough, I've run budget processes for big corporations. You get buy-in and you set these goals long in advance of asking people to drive it down to what it means in terms of execution. To set out objectives on February 27th for closure in less than a month is a very difficult position to be in. And so all I'm asking is that next year, I know that you guys have this envision. We didn't execute it well this year, and there's lots of reasons, and totally acceptable reasons, including a new town manager. But next year, it's gonna be critical to have these guidelines done in December. Just,
The guidelines
We're done in
themselves were done in
September.
September.
We did
so
this-
your guidelines, but not the translation of that in terms of what that meant for
Budget.
passing.
But
There
it-
is a budget planning process that brings it through in a much more timely fashion.
And that's all I'm
And
asking, is that
that's-
if you can honor that next year, this is gonna really change the dynamic. And if we continue to work on understanding shared priorities, it's gonna be a different
Ongoing.
conversation. But if you don't
Right.
build the shared priorities conversation, and you don't follow a timeline that allows for the conversation to happen, we're gonna be back here again. And I guess I have all the energy in the world, but I don't have the patience to sort of be in this position again next year. And so all I'm doing is asking respectfully that we really honor what we've already set up as really good operating principles.
Thanks. Again, you know, the process is intended to have a completed budget by mid-December.
Yeah.
And for a variety of reasons, some of them understandable, going through a town manager search, some of them that I frankly can't explain.
Right.
The process was completed by the previous town manager, but unfortunately not in a format that Chris had an opportunity to review and then essentially fulfill on his watch. Likewise, it appears that maybe the budget planning process was somewhat delayed as well.
So-
Having said that, it's an excellent point, and I think we should, as a group, be held to task to make sure that we deliver in a timely fashion so that it can be reviewed.
We'll be here next year.
Thank
Well,
you.
hopefully not in the same
We'll be having
state.
these conversations in September.
Well, but yes, we'll have these conversations in September, October. So thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you very much. I'll see you tomorrow night.
Yep.
Any more public comment? Okay, next item is advance in lieu of borrowing, ambulance sewer expansion and sewer inflow.
Yeah. If I
Yeah,
could-
that one's postponed.
I wanna report good news and bad news.
Yeah.
Good news that the Cohasset basketball team is moving on in the playoffs. The bad news is that as a result of that, the kids who are coming tonight can't be here to be thanked for the work they do on the streetlight mapping project.
100% good
Yes,
news.
so we'll have them back at a future meeting, so I just wanna let you know. So they did great work, we'll hear more about it, but we have to postpone it for a moment.
Have we bought them yet? The streetlights?
No, it's an ongoing conversation.
So can I just ask one point of
Sure.
order? We wanna give you a copy of what we spoke
Oh,
about
that'd be
today.
great.
So,
Very
how do
good.
I do that? Do I hand that to the
Tracy?
secretary?
Yeah.
Tracy, yeah.
Alright, so, duly
Thank you
noted.
very
All
much.
of our
Thank you
names are
very
on
much.
top.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Paula, can I?
Hey,
Just a couple of things tonight. The first one is advance in lieu of borrowing. And I believe that all of you have been through this kind of process before. It basically gives us the opportunity, to the extent possible, without interfering with our ability to pay bills, to use cash that we may have in order to pay for some of the upfront early costs before we borrow. I mean, without this, we would be borrowing a chunk of money up front and then using it as we need it. This way, we can use what cash we have and then borrow on the back end. Saving interest, basically, and helping us consolidate the costs. We've got 3 of them here tonight. Reducing the cost potentially of bands, the number of bands, those are about $500 each, but also the spread in the interest we pay versus the interest we earn.
Are we actually bonding these items in whole?
We will be banning these because everything needs to be paid back before the end of the fiscal year.
Right.
And eventually, bonding most, if not all of them.
But this is
But we
temporary
do have the
borrowing in the
potential to
meantime.
pay down, to pay down on a ban if we have that kind of, option with.
Right, and
Yeah,
just,
really.
I remember some of these items from time on the capital budget committee, and I would think that the sewer expansion might be a longer term than we would normally do for a vehicle. That's why I was asking.
We also have the dump truck, which is not listed. It isn't listed on the agenda. Did you
If
add
that
it?
has already been approved, I just put that because, the reason why is because that 75,000 appears on the ambulance paperwork.
I see.
Because those numbers there help make sure that we're following the law and not overextending ourselves,
That's
but
why
also keeping track of what we've already approved.
I thought maybe something had happened.
Nope, and
Good.
so all that will be
Very good.
banned before the end of the year, and then going forward, there may be additional bans or bonds to
Thank you
take it
very
through the
much.
life of the authorization.
Okay, yeah, it's just, and my question was really just surrounding, if, the life of the bond, and making certain that we're not folding shorter lived assets into a longer lived obligation. Make sense?
Yep.
Okay.
And none of it would extend beyond the original authorization, and they're all, everything, depending on what you borrow, there are legal limits to how long you could extend that.
Right.
So you may
Yeah.
ban it for a year up front, but then over the long term, for the full amount, may be a longer period of time, but it wouldn't exceed the original amounts.
And just-
For instance, like a truck or something like that, those are like 5 or 10 years. But like big land purchases, sewer expansions, those might be like 20 or 30 years.
Yeah.
That type of thing. They wouldn't, in total, all the different bans and bonds won't exceed the full length that we could potentially do, that we're allowed to do by law for any given item.
Okay. Curious, what's 1 year paper running you?
Less than 1%.
Good. Okay.
So the amount to be advanced is that lower number, the 230 and the 120, right?
Yeah.
And the
The
450
230, yep, the 120,
and the 450.
and the 450.
I'll move those.
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, 5-0, thank you.
Thank you, Paula.
So are we signing those tonight, or are we getting those tomorrow, or?
If you will.
Yeah.
Oh, I thought they were in your packet, sorry.
Yeah,
No.
they're in the back.
These aren't the originals. Oh, Martha has them, so you'll pass them around.
Okay.
Do you
Yeah.
have the, other withholding licenses?
What, I guess it's passing it along.
Paula's up for the next one too.
Next couple.
Yes.
Take two.
Oh, shoot. What?
You can talk while we sign it. so-
Okay.
Yeah.
The next is basically a follow-up to what we did at town meeting. One of the articles that we passed was the chapter 40, section 57, which allows us to withhold licenses, permits, et cetera, for folks who have back taxes that are very old, actually. They're over a year old. Part of that process is that I am required to produce a list. I have done that. We're working with the software vendor. It's to some extent manual at this process, at this time, but we're working with the software to get that fully automated. I did distribute it in the last department head meeting for those folks who are issuing licenses, but this board, as I understand it, also issues licenses. So I forwarded an email copy to Chris, but I'll forward it on to Tracy and get copies to you and get a hard copy. Just please know that some of these, just legitimate mistakes. Just today, we found out that we had mailed a very old bill to the wrong address. It was the wrong town. It was the right street name and number, sort number and, but, so they didn't get it. So, I mean, there are cases like that and just honest mistakes. So we're just basically giving people a little elbow to the ribs to remind them to pay their bills, and for the most part, they do. So we are making progress in that vein as well. So I just wanted to follow up on that.
Excellent.
If anyone has any questions.
I don't think so. Anybody have any questions?
No.
Okay. Dropbox?
Yep, that's just an idea that we've been kind of kicking around in our office, and we floated it through the department head meeting earlier this week, so we thought we'd bring you into the loop, and that is to have some sort of mailbox, Dropbox in the front of town hall to provide 24/7 drop-off service for people who are paying their taxes, dropping off census reports, and anything like that they need. There is a caveat. You have to make sure if something needs to be here at a certain day and time, you're better off coming in here and getting a stamp at the window. But if you're doing it ahead of time, or the date is not important, that provides easy access. You don't have people
Climb
struggle
those
getting up the
stairs.
stairs, the rain, the kids, whatever the case may be. So just generally floating that idea to see what your thoughts are.
Sounds like a great idea.
Is it daily collection?
Yep, my office has agreed to go out and collect it on a daily basis. So the exact logistics of that, making sure, because some offices are more sensitive about time, date stamping information, particularly the assessor's office. We'll figure out those logistics, and then there's some specific days that we'll have to get a policy around to make sure, but that's something that, I mean, I think it would be helpful.
Maybe the shop at the high school could build it.
Yep.
Just a thought.
It's a potential. It just has to look very different from a mailbox, because we know it's gonna get confused.
Yeah.
And,
Or a suggestion box.
It needs to be secure, so.
Right.
Right,
Yes, that's
right.
But we just wanted to, we talked about it at the department meeting. I know other towns have them, I've seen them, and we said, well, why not? So we're bringing it forward to see if there was any kind of historical objection or some other problem. If there's not, then we'll just kind of proceed,
Can't
and we'll
think
do it
of
in the
any.
most cost-effective way
Yeah.
that we can, so,
Yeah.
okay, great.
Follow up? If it's all right if I just ask
Sure,
a
yeah.
question that's kind of off topic a little bit. Just, I remember like last year hearing a lot about leaning, and is there a process that we have in place for leaning properties that don't pay their taxes, or
Right, it's called a tax taking.
tax taking?
Yeah, you typically do it on an annual basis.
Oh, so it's done annually?
Right.
Okay.
And it's a whole process to make sure, you contact the individuals, and it has already gone through the deputy collector, so they've received notices from them, and
Okay.
eventually gets through the newspaper, and then what you do is you record a lien at the registry of deeds,
Right.
and that protects the town, in case there's any kind of issues with bankruptcy or, change of ownership and that type of thing. There's a time period, which is about 3.5 years, but typically, treasurers will do, collectors rather, will do that within 12 months.
So
So there is a formal process.
Yeah, my understanding was there wasn't as formal a process in the way history, so, and there was some catching up last year, so I just wanted, it
There
just
may
came
have
to
been,
mind, yeah.
I don't
There have
know
been
when
in the
that.
past, there've been
Yeah,
treasurers that have
sometimes,
done this,
it-
yes, it just goes up and down depending on the treasurer.
There are actually
Yes.
different schools of thought about how to do that. Some folks, some collectors prefer to wait until the very last minute and work with taxpayers. And others prefer to get the lien on as soon as they possibly can, and protect the town that way. But others are more willing to work with individuals. It depends on the circumstance, and as long as you treat everybody the same,
Absolutely.
I'd like to do it within the year. My goal actually is to get going on that pretty soon, because I like letting people know about their real
Where
estate
they stand.
taxes when they're looking at income tax returns.
Absolutely. Just remind them to keep the checkbook out.
Right,
Yeah, thank you.
right. Anything else?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Paul.
Thanks,
Take care.
Town manager update.
Okay, just today, I think we can just take all this pass around. I met with Paul Carlson in his role as the treasurer of Cohasset Community Television, and he presented me with their 2013 financial update. This is their, it's not they go through a process where they do a full audit every 3 years, and then they just do an update in between. So this is just an update, and the sum of substance is they're financially secure and planning for the future. So you have all of that, and we had a nice conversation today, and again, I just wanna, it's an excellent town resource. It's really great, and it's even, not only just a resource for the town, it's an incredible resource for the kids in the high school and the middle school to be able to try their hands at this stuff and to learn TV and video production. It's really nice. It's a really great facility. I met with Paul Kearse, the director of the chairman of the Elder Affairs Board of Directors. I have to make sure I get the titles right here. The other day, I had a great meeting with him. We were talking about the lease at the community center, which we know expires on the 30th, but there are provisions in place to extend it. So with that, it's almost an automatic at this point, so when that's under control, the lease price will be the same, as we go forward into the new year. We're gonna continue to be I'll be continuing to be actively engaged with them and with Coral and her staff about senior programming, so, that was a great meeting. We mentioned briefly the department head meeting this week. What I decided to do after I had my first one here, which is kind of a challenging space to begin with, I said, let's move them around the town, and so our first off-site meeting was at the library, and our in-town. Jackie Rafferty hosted, she was very excited, we were very happy to be there.
Yep.
So she gave us a little talk about the library, which is a beautiful facility.
Gorgeous.
And that meeting room was a great space, so we also, I think it helped facilitate a really great conversation we had. And I'm planning on continuing this rotation. I mean, I know Barbara has offered space at the school, we'd love to have, and again, I've been trying to include her, she couldn't come this meeting, so I really wanna bring her to the meetings on a regular basis, and, so we're gonna get up there at one point, I think the Lightkeeper Cottage will be a great place to go at some point, and some other places, the South Shore Arts Center, other places. I think it'd be great for all of us to understand what's the town's all about, and
Excellent idea, excellent.
so again, it was well received, and we're gonna I haven't picked a spot for next time, and we're also gonna try to, again, to build on some of the great opportunities we have here, like with talking about healthy workforce. So I'm gonna bring them into a future meeting, we'll talk about the healthy workforce initiatives that we have, which will help with our medical ratings, going down in the future.
Excuse me, do you have the date for the Health and Rec Fair?
It's March 30th, that's on my, it's March 30th, yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
The sign
I'm
is
sorry,
the
31st.
31st.
It's on my wall.
30th.
Um,
It's the
There's a
30th.
flyer on the nurse's door.
It's
too,
a
with
Saturday.
Yes.
I knew I saw something about it, but I
It's
didn't have the
Saturday.
exact.
Saturday the 30th.
It's Saturday,
Thank
it's
you.
the 30th.
March 30th.
That's actually doing very well. I just talked to Mary Goodwin yesterday, had a little update on a lot of things, and that was one of them, so planning for that's great.
That is a great, great town
Yeah,
event.
looking forward to
I'm
that.
just sorry it's on Sunday. I can never go. In March, I have too many family.
It's a
Saturday,
Saturday.
it's a Saturday.
No,
It's a Sunday.
It is a Sunday?
It is a Sunday?
Oh, it's a
It's
Sunday.
a Sunday.
I know, 'cause
The
my
29th
confused.
is Saturday.
Saturday's the 8th,
The
15th,
29th.
22nd.
Multiples of 7 are on Fridays. You can work backwards and forwards.
Okay.
That's how.
Thank you.
This past week, I got to meet the early morning shift change at the fire and police stations to meet the guys.
Oh, I hope they had coffee for you.
They had coffee and I brought the food, so it was a good trade-off. And it was just a great opportunity to meet. I mean, again, a lot. And I'm not going to see a lot of these folks all the time. They're out on the field or they're in the station, and it was great for them. It was great for me. I got some compliments, and I really got a chance to really have some conversations about the town, about what they do, and we had some really enlightening conversations on the police side. And in fact, I think I mentioned last week, we're going to be bringing Detective Lennon and Acting Chief Quigley in 2 weeks to talk about issues related to drug sale and drug trafficking.
Good.
So, and again, there's a lot of really good stuff the town is doing, and again, you know, there's realities that we have to be honest about it, but you know, there's a lot of proactive work going on, and it was enlightening to me, and very positive, by the way, to hear the great work that's going on. We were supposed to today, and I'm sorry that I wasn't able, this had to be rescheduled, but we were supposed to be in a meeting today with Representative Garrett Bradley's office with Mass Highway. So that, we were able to set that up, thanks to Chief Sylvia and working with Representative Bradley's office. That's gonna be later in the month, because the highway administrator had to reschedule. So we're gonna really be pushing 3A, safety issues with 3A. Intersection improvements, the study is intersection improvements, sidewalks, safer routes for kids to get to school, safer routes for commuters to get to the station and back and forth. So we think there's a lot of opportunity there. Garrett Bradley is pushing it. We want to be very supportive of that and double down on getting some more support and getting it into the state's transportation plan sooner rather than later.
Chris, I've been working on that too, at another angle. When we did the restoration of the train, this was part of it, which they never did, they ignored it. And then we have the 3A study, and this is the 3A study that you're pushing now.
Correct.
But there's a component that we have to give some money to it, I think.
I have no doubt that there will be some requests for town contributions at various places.
Yeah.
Our goal is to get as much state funding as
Well,
possible.
I understand that, and I agree with you, and, but I think because I went to the planning board hearings on it, and folks from, the state, earlier, and we always have to, in any of these projects, we also have to ante up some money too, yeah.
By the way, speaking of planning board, I actually met with them last week as well, and 3A was one of the topics, so I got to talk to them a little bit, and I think they were a little surprised about my background in that area. It was great, so we had a nice conversation, and I know that they were very interested in participating on 3A issues, and so and I know they also want to talk about some other longer term topics, which I think we'll talk about at a future meeting, so I know that was another positive thing. I don't want to take anybody's thunder, I was at the MMA breakfast on Friday. I don't know if either of you can mention, both Martha and Fred were there. It was over at Weymouth Town Hall, and again, it was an excellent opportunity to hear what MMA is doing, and to what other communities are doing. So, and I got to meet some of the neighbors, including the mayor of Weymouth, who I didn't know that was the mayor of Weymouth. She didn't have a name tag on it,
Right.
but a great, nice building too, by the way. But a great opportunity, and you know, several state reps and state senators were there, and it was good program. Started this week with something I'm trying to establish, which is ongoing labor management conversations. Something that I used to do regularly in my prior town, because you don't want to have the only meetings you have be grievances and union contract negotiations. You want to have an ongoing conversation to keep the lines of communication open. I started this week with the SEIU team here for the town hall folks. We had an excellent conversation, really positive. I think we're moving in the right direction. And Mary Gallagher was with me. Actually, I'm pointing, but she ran away.
She ran away.
She was there. And
What scared her?
we had a great meeting, and we're going to meet with the library folks next, and we're going to continue those conversations. So I think it was a great opportunity for them and for us. There's some things we need to work through that have happened, and I think we've started off on the right foot for that, so I'm very happy about that. The HR project, work has begun, I think I mentioned that last meeting, very positive start, and I'll continue to update you as we go forward on that. The budget, I think we had a long conversation, which was great, great conversation. I've been having a lot of conversation. I think Paul Schubert has been on speed dial at this point. We've been talking so much. So we've been talking a lot, and I'm very, very grateful for that opportunity that everyone's willing to have these conversations. So, it's been very positive in that sense. I know that there's a lot of, it's been a challenge, but my goal here is to get you numbers that are going to fund us to the level that we absolutely can, and also be realistic for tomorrow and the day after and the day after. So I think that what we last week was a starting conversation in a very short window, and I'm looking forward to having these ongoing conversations. We started talking about that last time at the Selectmen's meeting. We really do need to have these longer conversations, to assess where we are, where we're going. And again, the town has come a long way, but I don't want anyone to think that it's all over, that the town is in excellent fiscal shape. We don't have to think about it anymore. I mean, and I'm not saying that anybody's saying that, but the town can't, every municipality has come through a really tough time, and the bottom line is we just don't know. And I'm not even talking about the big stuff on the world stage that we're all paying attention to, which could rock the world economy. It's even the local level. We really have to make sure that, that Beacon Hill is focused on making sure the municipalities are right at the top. The state issues that have to be funded too, but, issues like OPEB and all, there's a state component to that. I mean, the state put us, all of us, in a hole to a large extent, and they really need to help with that, and roads and transportation and local aid, and, we really need to have those ongoing conversations. But, even locally, it's establishing and monitoring benchmarks. We don't really have a lot of those as much as we'd like to, and I'd like to help establish those. And I'm talking about levels of service and where we are and where we want to be. And, staff we have an awesome staff that does a lot of great work, and I'm trying to get those resources to help develop some of those as we go forward. One of the ways I'm looking to do that, there's going to be a New England StatNet meeting, and they're focusing this time on inspectional services. What New England StatNet is a regional program that's based out of UMass Boston, but it's supported by the Rappaport Institute and Harvard University as well. And it's been very well supported by the Patrick administration, which is about municipal performance management and helping get those resources into communities. Everyone talks, Boston has a very big program, but and it's very important in a big municipality like that. But in a small municipality, it's just as critical because we don't have so many resources. We have to make sure we're managing them properly, and we're getting the very best value for every dollar that we have. And so I've already had conversations with folks. I've been working with them for 2 years because we're kind of an orphan. We did a lot of great work in New York, but there was no one in our neighborhood doing this kind of work. So we were invited to join the New England program. That's one of the reasons I'm sitting here today, is because of the contacts I made through that. So I'm going to start. That meeting is later this month, and I'll let you know how that goes. I'm going to bring some staff with me. It's out in Charlton typically, so we got a little bit of a drive. Because it's there, and so everyone can come in for it's just really a half day meeting. Come in the morning, do a quick in-house lunch, and do a follow up, and then head back to your offices. So, and that's, by the way, there's a school side program to that too, called School Stat, which a lot of communities are taking part in. It helps with benchmarking and best practices. Because we're not islands. That's one of the great things. We can share best practices. We can share benchmarks. And again, I'm looking forward to getting more information and sharing that with everybody. So, and I'm also, as part of the educational programming for myself, as well as for the town, planning a visit to South Shore Votech soon to get over there to see them, and to see how else we might be able to partner to help both the kids learn and us achieve here. So I think there's some opportunities that I want to at least explore. Because again, I was told that this very table came from folks from there. I think it's a lot.
$900.
Well, that's an extremely excellent value. And in fact, I complimented last week. I said it's a lot of great things at the high school, but I was incredibly impressed by the wood shop and some of the work the kids were producing. Just sign me up. I'll buy what comes out of that wood shop. It's great.
To replace the guest table there?
That would be great. It's kind of like the island of misfit tables, right?
Well, that table also came from there.
Yeah, so look, there's clearly work to be done. That's a quick update, and again, I think that there's a lot of really great stuff going on. I just want to reiterate that. I've been out every night. I've been enjoying every meeting. Some have been a little more intense than some of the others, but,
Call it animated.
a little more animated, that's a good way to describe it. But the theme that I'm getting is that people really, really care deeply about this community. Again, that's something I felt from the very first day I came here. And people really want the community to move forward, and they really wanna work together to make those things happen. And I'm excited about that, because that's why I'm here. Because, there's no fun, in doing what I do here, just to monitor arguments, okay? I mean, you could have diametrically different opinions and try to get to a position, and that's okay, that's part of the conversation. But you wanna have people willing to come into the arena and have those positive conversations, and again, it's a lot more fun to help set direction and get us there and help benchmark, than to monitor, accusations and stuff. And I think people don't wanna do that anymore, they don't wanna look backwards. You wanna learn from the past, you don't wanna be captive to it, and I gotta tell you, the last, it's almost been 2 months now, though it feels like it's been longer, in a very good way. I don't mean
Good
that,
save.
in a very good way, because I really have gotten to meet so many people. People have been so generous with their time, and there's still so many more people that I have to meet. I'm looking forward to Merle Brand giving me a tour up in the Beechwood area and around town, and other folks, to get out to school activities, particularly as the weather gets warmer, and more people are outside. I think we're all looking for spring, we're all eager for it. And I know that Carl's guys and Mark's guys in facilities are really looking for spring too. But it's been really, it's been a great, very active, period for me, and I'm looking forward to continuing this great work here. So, that's my update.
Thank you, Chris. Selectmen comments. Martha?
Well, after that, I went to the, Public Works Committee, and we worked on chapter 90, and tomorrow the Senate is supposed to vote on it, and MMA supposedly had a meeting with the committee. And the problem we have is is getting the 300 million each year, because the governor slashed it to 200 million. And also, which many people, because there's lots of different kinds of people that work that are in different towns, that are the DPWs plus elected officials, and they now wanna have a 5-year plan given to them, and they're very suspicious, as Massachusetts people usually are, that once you give it to them, it'll be required. And they don't want that, because people do it, but they don't want the people in the Golden Dome to know what they're doing. Because we do a 5-year plan for roads and everything like that, but they wanna compile it all for the state, and I think vis-a-vis funding, there's probably something underneath it, and so they're strongly against that. And we had Senator Brian Joyce there, and we gave him that kind of thing that we wanted, and we also wanted the 300 million. And actually, I guess originally they said they wanted 800, and then they cut it down to 500, because the roads are in terrible shape, the bridges and everything. And you heard the discussion with the schools and everything we're doing. We need as much money as we can get here. So when Headland comes here, we can zero in on what they're doing, what the budget is done.
Hopefully their traveling roadshow will be here in the next 10 or 15 minutes.
They should be here.
They're in Hall right now,
Yes.
I believe, yeah.
Yeah,
They're
so
trying to send
that was great, and also the Board of Health, I saw Robin, and he said they're working on tobacco regulations for the drugstores to eliminate them. And, we'll hear about that. He thinks he can do it in-house and not have it again on the ballot, or, I don't know, so we'll stay tuned, he'll probably communicate. Okay.
Thank you. Karen?
I have nothing, thank you.
Dan?
Yeah, I just wanted to, CPC met last night, and I just wanna kind of float out some of the, projects that were just kind of discussed. There was no deliberation and no formal applications, but they're obviously gonna queue up, for potential, approval at town meeting. There's a proposal to buy some open space off of Norman Todd Road behind the houses that are new it's currently, I think, managed by the Cohasset Land Trust.
Land Foundation.
Land Foundation, thank you. I got confused, and they
is
explained the
confusing.
difference with the,
It is
with,
confusing.
the Conservation Trust as well last night. And I had to look up the agenda from last night to remember what we talked about last night, where Martha remembers everything from.
Oh, I don't.
I said, I don't know how you do it.
I didn't, we
Oh.
had such a, it was a almost 3-hour discussion, so it
Yeah.
was easy to read.
Anyway, kudos. There's a potential proposal for restoring the basketball courts at the Deer Hill School, which is kind of phase 2 of the playground project that was funded partially last year by CPC. The Captain John Smith recognition date, there's a whole bunch of moving pieces on that with that the historical commission's working on, and it may include that cupola down by the harbor and a rebuilding of that and a plaque, which we,
I forgot to mention anything about it, and Fred was there too.
You were there
Well,
last
We'll
night.
go back to you,
We'll go
yeah.
back.
And then obviously, and then tomorrow night, there's a meeting for the town hall renovation committee, and where that will end up going. It will be at town meeting for some approval, most likely architectural drawings, but that's what's going on. And then this morning, I was at an MMA meeting. They have the nicest offices, I have to tell you. Ooh, very swank. My favorite topic, medical marijuana. It's just a crazy,
Is that
crazy.
like medical wink wink marijuana?
Somebody was there from the Department of Public Health, and just the hoops that the state has to go through to monitor this situation. But it was very interesting, and the fees that applicants get, and then that they have to pay when they're a licensed dispensary does cover the infrastructure. But anyway, it's going to be a very interesting couple of years, because most likely there's going to be we're going to put all these structures in place and all these systems in place for these medical dispensaries, and then there's going to be a ballot initiative that'll probably make it legal. That's just what seems to be coming down the pike. And we also discussed some legislation that's pending, and there's one particular one that I'll ask Garrett and Bob Hedlund about when they get here, just about a lot of open meeting law work that the MMA's doing to add some clarity to different aspects. So it was actually a really great discussion. As you know, it's great to get
It's wonderful, yeah.
involved in the other communities, and I always say that it's, we're not doing this in a vacuum. Every municipality is facing the same questions that we are, and trying to prioritize the same things. So it's always good to get out of, get away from yourself a little bit and see how other people are juggling important work. So that's it.
Steve?
Couple things. First of all, as did the rest of the folks here, I spent a good chunk of Saturday afternoon being educated on the ways of licensing for alcohol permits. It was without a doubt the most informative thing I've attended this year. I learned a great deal, realized how much I didn't know and how much I still didn't know even when it was done. But from that point alone, because it was that useful, I just want to make sure that everyone recognizes that this was done at the initiative of the acting police chief. And I have to thank him greatly, because I feel like I know one element of the job a whole lot better than I did previously. Excuse me. The second thing I wanted to bring up, I went away for a week down to visit my daughter in South Carolina, and I was discussing this with Chris afterwards. We were in Charleston, and Charleston's a fantastic small city, and it actually operates more on a county system. We were staying in a house down there. It was a very low-key vacation, and we actually went to one of the county parks. There are several of them, but this particular one has a space set aside where, I gotta tell you, in this this particular one was a 4-acre area, friends came. I mean, it was a party atmosphere as long as that park was open. And these, I mean, these guys just would run and jump and play, and you'd say, well, wait a minute. No, that was the dogs. The dogs would come and play.
It's the dog
All right. The owners socialized. They were absolute strangers, and they just socialized. They were chatting with each other, laughing about how the dogs were playing together. Kids were in there having a great time, and interestingly enough, as a dog park, it was clean as a whistle. There were rules, very well laid out. Chris and I got to talking about this because he'd actually been to the park a couple of years prior to this, and was very familiar with it. And it's first and foremost important to recognize that Charleston's a very dog-friendly city. You can go out to dinner, and if there's patio dining, it's entirely likely that you'll find owners' dogs sitting quietly beside their owners as they eat dinner. So something like this made sense, but I look around this town and I thought the benefit that I saw, that it was not just for the pets, for the dogs. The benefit that I saw was that it was a great place for people to come and meet. Now, we have lots of places to walk our dogs, but we don't have any places for the dogs to go be themselves, which is, they're pack animals. They get along with other dogs because that's where they're supposed to be in the wild. And so it's a thought that I've discussed with Chris briefly, and frankly, I'd like to find some community support for it. We own lots of land. This is not an expensive proposition, but it does require a place to park. And it just seems that we might be able to carve out something like this. And I'm simply floating it in front of the board because, frankly,
Sounds
I'm
intriguing, yeah.
I'm curious as to whether or not it's of interest.
Sounds very interesting.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I don't happen to have a dog, but I like them.
It's a perfect place for you. You could probably
That's
take one
right.
home.
They come home. I
Yes.
have them often visiting, so.
There's a very active dog walking community within Cohasset, and the nice thing about it is through the years you get to know people, you get to know their dogs. We all know the dogs' names, we rarely know the people's names. But there's a camaraderie among dog owners, and as Steve correctly points out, the dogs all get along. Usually the problem is a hysterical owner who, is nervous about their dog, and the dogs pick up on that, and it'll cause a problem. I know that there are some people, friends of mine, who have dogs that they are uncomfortable letting run in the woods, and so for people like that, that would probably be a great resource to have.
That's what brought it to mind. Like I said, the benefit for the dogs is in question from what I could see. But what surprised me was the benefit for the people, and that was really neat. So
The real benefit for the people, though, is not standing around talking. The real benefit for the people is walking with their dogs.
no, that breaks, you break a sweat, Devil.
I do wanna follow up on with the conversation. I mean, I had been there in Charleston, and I was down there a couple of years ago when I was the acting parks commissioner as well in North Hempstead, so one of my more fun assignments, actually. But the gentleman who runs that system is a very, very open with his time. He likes to bring people down and show them, and the system is really, it's operated on these amazing living management principles, and I mean, it's like a living, perfect textbook of, staff who buy into values, who really implement. It's great system. They've done a great job of preserving land, but in terms of the dog parks, they have scattered around the county. It's a big county. Charleston County is not just a city; it goes up and down the coast. But they actually program. They have things like yappy. They call them yappy hours. And the dogs are free, but the owners have to pay. And they've really become very big social activities. And they get sponsors for them, and and it really has become a really big. They've gotten sponsorships from local restaurants. They get sponsorships from local pet companies and suppliers. And it becomes a very big social activity for the owners, and again for the dogs as well. And they get to socialize more, and it's become a really big part of the the Charleston County Parks Department. Now, we tried to do one in North Hempstead, in our park system, and we were in the process of carving one out when but I saw towards several, and one was a very high end one. And again, you have a separate small dog area, big dog area. They actually had toys ready for you when you came. This is a very high end village. They were already, they had the fetch sticks and stuff ready. there was sand. It was almost like, then the golden retrievers would come out, hop out of the back and go into the park. And,
Yeah.
but it really, they can be great, because I was watching people, I was watching the dogs, but the people interacting was really just as important, because it really gave people an opportunity to really just talk, and the dogs are having a good time, they're talking, and it was another great opportunity for community
It's
activity.
like the beach, which,
Yes.
has that same flavor, minus the dogs.
And it's year round.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's great.
Before I finish, I would be
Yeah.
remiss if I didn't mention this one last item. Thank you, by the way, for your open-mindedness on this one.
Sure.
Well,
I think it's great.
Now I get to see if I can get some hardy volunteers to push it forward. Tonight's public comment, I just brought this about in my mind. I don't know how we encourage and maintain the type of involvement that was expressed here tonight by both Sarah McInerney and Katie Dugan, representing many others. But I sure would like to find a way to encourage that continuing involvement. Yeah, sometimes the discussions they raise are uncomfortable to have, or they're differing from our own points of view or someone else's points of view. But the fact of the matter is that it is that discussion that's absolutely required. And frankly, it's been something it seems to have been missing up to this point, other than in a finger-pointing exercise from any particular entity. So to be able to take on the factual issues and address the factual issues can actually get us closer to a resolution on any one particular item of contention. And I once again, even though they're absent at the moment, I want to say thanks, and I hope they continue with this.
I almost asked them to be on the advisory, and then I was like, oh wait, that's a Troika appointment, I can't do that.
I'd like to mention, since I regularly go to the meetings, as Diane does, they're always asking questions of the committee, they have ideas, and they're very alert on the process at the school committee, and I agree with you, and there's 4 or 5 of them that always are asking questions, and that's very good. We used to have a lot of that in the past. You
Well,
remember that in the past.
It's great to see it,
It's
it's
coming
great to see
back
it
again.
return.
Yeah.
It really is.
They're very articulate and organized, which is
Yeah.
helpful.
If you could bottle that, we would have bottled it long ago.
Yeah, really.
Martha, you
It all
wanna go
took
back
us
to
away.
you?
Make the most of it.
Well, well, I just wanted to expand a little bit on John Smith.
Yep.
Fred brought the speaker down. He and Howie Alston had breakfast with him, and he spoke on what they could do to bring down information for our John Smith Day. And we talked at great length about the Native Americans and it was a very positive evening. The committee also would like another member there, and we think we may have. Jackie was there, and so
Good.
it's getting more organized now and a lot more work. But Fred, why don't you talk
Well,
about the speaker?
yeah, John Peters came down, he's actually a Wampanoag, but he is the executive director of the Bureau of Indian Affairs for the state. And part of their job is to just help any communities that are working on historical issues and stuff like that. Some of the interesting things that they talked about happening in September might be I didn't realize wigwams come in both the winter and the summer
Right.
type, and they may build a small wigwam as an example of what it was like in the village.
Very
It was
cool.
down here, and maybe even some
Food.
tribal dancing and
And
some
we're gonna- and
historical
music.
food.
Powwow.
He's also affiliated with the Plymouth Plantation, so he's connected down there, and there's a lot of historical resources there. So it's just kind of a information gathering of what type of historical resources would be available, and the goal being that we'd like to offer also with the schools and the kids up there, a real learning experience to go back 400 years to what was here when these civilizations collided. So, that's, looks to be a very interesting
Mhm.
September.
Yeah, and Jackie brought a lot of her stuff. She had done a lot of research because of the books she wrote, and she had a lot of pictures and so forth. And Becky McGrath has, of course, the history, being born here and her ancestors being here, and she has a lot of background stuff, so we're getting a lot of material, and then with this HEDIS, we'll get stuff, so we'll have to sort through everything we have, and I think it'll be a fun day. We were trying to decide with the title, Peter Wood was there, whether to have when to have the ceremony at the site in the harbor, and then maybe having this at the, the square here, the food and the, well, I call it teepee, but it's not that. I was corrected. Wigwam.
Well, it could end up being a teepee too, we don't know.
Well, yeah, I know, and where to have it, and then I suggested a connection with a little parade. So, depending on the tide, it's all where the tide is, the high tide.
And there's also, the Historical Society has a lot of artifacts
Well, I
also.
do, we have
Yeah,
tons of
yeah, so
artifacts,
that
and
might
I
be
even have
interesting,
Indian, I have those
Yeah, Indian
heads,
heads,
I can
arrowheads,
pick them
yeah.
up there around the house. So I think it'll be something, and we don't have a wet rain day, no one's mentioned it, but it's the 13th on a Saturday, and hopefully, we've had all our rain and snow right now.
That's right, 13th of
September.
September.
Mhm. And usually September's dry, at least it's supposed to be.
You
Since we're
just
having
can't,
snow.
you can't worry about it.
No, I know,
you
but I think it's very
It's gonna
good.
be a full program and series of
And I think
lead-ins and.
we want, particularly the kids get in, maybe, we had, if they're gonna essay contests, all kinds of stuff for the schools, so I think it'll be a good time, for all.
Absolutely.
I really do. So, and I sent letters, I read it, I got them printed here, and Becky signed and sent it to the senator and the congressman to reserve the day. We want them to come and
Terrific.
speak, so.
Excellent.
Just trying to look at the tides.
Okay, so I had two things I wanted to mention. One was I went up, last week to the MAPC winter meeting, which was at the Colonnade Hotel. And, one of the things that interested me, and I talked about with Chris this morning a little bit, was, one of the communities, they had some, projects that 5 or 6 communities are working on, but one was I believe it was Arlington that, went out to bid with the help of MAPC to convert their streetlights to LED streetlights, had a 3.5-year payback, and they were able to find one bidder that installed them and maintained them. There's like a 15-year guarantee. So if anything happened, it was one phone call with no finger pointing, and for 15 years they're all set. 3.5-year payback is pretty impressive, and they were able to bundle that with like 4 other communities. So it all went out in a big bid package through MAPC. So we're gonna look into that some more. Chris has the details. The other thing was the MMA legislative breakfast, which was already been mentioned by Chris and Martha over in Weymouth. It is nice, as Diane said, to be in a room with a lot of surrounding communities and hear what's going on. And one of the things that really struck me, and this is a hot topic in the news, obviously, and we've discussed it here, which is this statewide epidemic on drugs, and how these other communities, what they're dealing with. And to some level, we're on the front lines, but on another level, some of these larger cities around us, Quincy and Brockton, Boston, are really on the front lines of it. So we heard some different police perspectives on it. State Senator was talking about the relationship between prescription drugs as kind of a gateway now into this, and so there's a lot of stuff going on, and we're gonna be trying to get on top of it, what we can do to participate. And so it was a productive meeting there. So that's all I have.
I just have a question about the streetlights.
Yeah.
What was our streetlight project, lamps that Merle worked on?
We were buying,
Purchase.
We
we
were
were buying.
purchasing them,
Yeah,
right?
that's the
Right.
first step.
So this is more of a
After we-
maintenance kind of
Yeah, after we
agreement.
purchase it, we could look at,
Well, the plan is actually to replace the lights with LEDs
Yeah.
and save money, that's
Yeah.
the plan. and that was approved,
By
I guess,
town.
last year, correct?
Right.
Right.
The funding to buy the LEDs.
Well, the funding to buy the lights, yes.
But they're not LED, we're just buying the whole system.
We're buying the pole and
Yeah.
the fixture.
Oh, I see,
Then
okay,
we
Yeah.
convert it,
I
once
got
we
it.
own it.
got it.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, at the time, the cost for conversion on LED was nowhere near what you were describing. But then again, LED fixtures and the bulbs themselves have dropped like a stone in price. So that's, which is all good news.
Yeah,
So,
Yeah, Brian is working with the consultant who did the work last year to update the numbers. And we're also trying to find a place to do because we're a small place and we're surrounded by people who already do this. Hull has its own world and Hingham has its own world. So to get someone to come in here just to work on the 500 lights of Cohasset is, we have, with the price, the first round of pricing wasn't as competitive as we would have liked it to be.
Okay.
So that's, we're having ongoing conversations about how to
Okay.
improve those things, so. But I'll have an update, I'll try to schedule it for the next meeting for you.
what's the date for the 400th anniversary?
September
well,
13th.
it's
September
this
13th.
year, it was in the summertime, but this date that with the
Is September
reenactment
13th.
would be September 13th.
13th, yes,
All right, give me a second.
it's a Saturday.
He's looking up the
I'm
tides.
just looking at the tide, I don't care about the
Yeah.
week.
There's an app for that.
Yeah, you guys are gonna love this, okay? You're
High
gonna,
tide at 3 p.m.
3:14.
Oh,
Nice.
okay, well, so
3:14.
that'll
Fred's
be
got
it.
the whole title chart memorized.
So,
Yeah, okay, Rain Man.
so the ceremony will be out there at the high tide, because you don't wanna have it low tide out there. And then they'll have the parade, they'll have the festivities in the common noonish or something, and then go out there. That's the way we.
Make sure we don't approve a road race.
Better not.
That's for the middle of it, yeah.
Yeah.
But I just want to make one point about the LED streetlights. Somewhere I read a story about a community that switched to LED stoplights and, directional lights. And something happened in the Northeast in the wintertime is, with regular lights, the heat in the lights melts the snow and ice off of it, and the LED doesn't have the heat generation, so they actually had to get rid of them because everything frosted up. So you almost need like another option to have some heat generated in case you have to melt some ice off, so.
This is why you don't wanna be on the forefront of anything,
Right,
right? Let
exactly,
everybody
yeah.
else make the
Yeah,
mistakes.
so, I just wanna make sure we're not gonna get in the same boat where we have a bunch of LED lights that a year or two in, where like, we need a new model or something.
No, streetlights are a different thing because,
They're underneath.
yeah, and also they're more for, things are gonna fall off them. The problem with this traffic signal, snow can get in them and cake them, and
Yeah.
I haven't actually seen that happen yet.
Fred, the speed at which this is moving with National Grid, we really don't have to. It might be powered by fusion by the
Yeah.
time.
Well, we're ready to stop everything at the first sight of the state senator and the state rep.
Let's wrestle the minutes to the ground while we.
Maybe
Yeah.
I heard a car. You heard a
Did you?
car? Is the doors open?
Any arguing?
We can do minutes, how about minutes?
Yeah, February 12th.
I have one little question. It's just what Diane always puts up. A V, now where did I find it? Which I didn't. Maybe it was the 25th. Yeah, it's on the selectmen comment period, the fourth line. It says the Speaker of the House's refusal to put it on the agenda. Isn't that correct,
That's
Diane?
correct.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm not in English.
Okay. Under continued discussion of FY, where it says Mr. Senior advised the board, drafted a letter in support, but it doesn't say in support of what.
Where are you? I'm sorry. FY15 budget.
Right, so go down to the second paragraph.
Mm-hmm. That's what it's.
Will be signing a letter of support, but nowhere does it indicate support
on
for
the
what?
train.
Okay.
I think
Weekend
the
service for the train.
Right.
Weekend
Okay.
service.
I'll add
Yeah.
it.
I didn't even see that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anything else? I hear noise.
So you wanna
There
vote?
they
Drop
are.
everything, they're here. Hold everything.
Were you breathless with anticipation?
Yes,
Mr.
we
Chair?
were.
We're running out of things to do.
We're so efficient.
Good to see you
You
again.
wanna, can we,
Sorry, we got hung up.
Oh, don't worry about it. We're glad you made it.
Oh, yeah, okay. You wanna take us now? Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
You wanna finish the
We were
minutes?
done 20 minutes
No,
ago.
forget the minutes. We'll take them up later.
When you pass those around,
How did it go in Hull?
fine. They said say hi to our partners in Cohasset.
Good.
No, they
They
didn't.
said no problem.
They didn't say anything about Cohasset. Other than something about a hockey game or something.
Yeah, enough. It's just a brief outline. Senator has one as well.
Chris get one?
Yeah. Sorry, you know, the towns of ours that have these 5 selectmen, oh, sorry. They have so many questions.
What's the good news from the State House?
Well, the senator had, started in Hull, so he told me to start here. The good news is we have a House budget that's coming out the week of April 28th. Well, it'll come out prior to that, we'll debate it the week of April 28th. Probably will come out about 10 days before that, maybe 2 weeks. The budget will have no new fees, no new taxes in it. It's also gonna have more local aid than the governor has proposed, which I know is really the crux of your question tonight. You know, exactly what that number will be is still in debate. There is discussion of a local aid resolution between the House and the Senate. It may materialize. I'm not hopeful. It's been a little bit difficult in the last few years, given that the numbers have changed. We are running about $1 billion ahead in anticipated revenue this year, which is a very good sign. Couple things that to be cautious, and we have about $1.2 billion in our stabilization fund now. Recall when the last recession hit, that was almost at about $3 billion, which prepared us extremely well compared to other states to weather that recession. And is also something that the bonding agency just lost, which is
Yeah.
why our rate has been superior in the last few years. So I think you'll see some money tucked into the rainy day. I think you are going to see a pay down. When the recession hit, we stretched the pension schedule out, funding schedule out, which is basically, I mean, it is what it is, it's just a gimmick, you know, to try to make the numbers look different. So in better times, we try to reduce that schedule. That's gonna be about a $150 million payment that I know the House is going to make as part of that, as part of our budget. You also, I'm trying to put a number on, I think it's gonna be at least 5% increase over last year's numbers. And, you know, that'll move a little bit and probably be a little higher, cause the Senate will have the benefit of some additional revenue projections, and they do their budget a little bit later. So I think you'll see them do something different, and then we'll get into conference. The session ends July 31st. I wouldn't be surprised, cause sometimes issues in the budget get intertwined with other issues between the two branches. I wouldn't be surprised if the bulk of the budget, including veto overrides and whatnot, isn't done until the end of July, although we're supposed to be done July 1st. I think there's a likelihood that you know, we're gonna finish somewhere in that time frame for sure. And then, so I just gave you some little bit of overview, some things that we've done legislative wise. I also wanted to point out, attached to the back of this is a alert that came out today from Commissioner Cheryl Barr of DPH. I don't know if you've been reading, I'm sure you have, the significant number of heroin overdoses on the South Shore. These are some action steps for communities to take, so I thought it'd be helpful to include it
thank you.
as part of that.
Very good.
Thank you.
In that, just a little bit of an overview, I have spoken to the town. We have projects that I know the town was looking for on the transportation bond bill, which we did include. We've shared that information with the senator's staff, because they're looking to take up the transportation bond bill in the next couple of weeks.
Well, aren't they voting tomorrow on chapter 90?
The Senate?
Yeah.
I don't know, I'll leave that to the
Well,
Senate.
I'll ask him.
Yeah. So that's, from, a House point of view, that's where we're at right now. I'll let the senator speak, and then obviously we'll get to, your questions. I'll make sure you answer any of those.
Great, so Garrett kind of provided an outline on the timing, and of course, we'll get to our version of the state budget for fiscal year 15, the week preceding Memorial Day. And as Garrett indicated, we'll probably have a clearer picture on local aid numbers at that point. However, the starting point that we have for discussion purposes, obviously, is the governor's submission of House 1 in January, and that does not paint that positive of a picture, as you know, when we look at what he suggests vis-a-vis local aid. Under the governor's proposal, we see a minor increase, approximately 4.6%, that will translate to Cohasset. That's about $185,000 increase in Chapter 70. And of course, if we look at the unrestricted local aid account, the governor is suggesting level funding there. What I did was on the third page of my handout, we showed kind of a trend line of what state aid has been as a percentage of local revenues, and you see that that is a declining number, unfortunately. We look at, what I did was I gave you a 5-year snapshot of what's happened with local aid on the next page, and that does not paint a rosy picture. As you know, in that 5-year window, we've seen an increase in state revenues of over $5 billion, averaging a little over $1 billion a year in new revenue growth. Yet we see the local aid account significantly diminish through that. Well, I should say the unrestricted local aid account significantly diminish during that time period. And as you know, the unrestricted local aid account is the merging of the old lottery aid and the additional assistance that we changed and reformed that local aid distribution process, which made sense. It was something I advocated for, given the way the additional assistance formula worked, which nobody could seem to figure out. The joke was it's in a piece of scrap paper in Mike Dukakis's desk somewhere. But some communities received additional assistance, some did not. Yet that account we see has gone down significantly. Public library grants down significantly in that period. Regional school transportation, which I know doesn't impact Cohasset. The sped circuit breaker has gone up in that period. Council on Aging grants have gone up. We've significantly unfunded. This is obviously something that affects communities case-by-case basis, but our fiscal year 14 charter school reimbursement, we're underfunding by $28 million. We're seeing growth in charter school numbers, yet reimbursement levels go down. And of course, what we've done in that same 5-year window that has adversely impacted cities and towns, the elimination of the Quinn bill. Our community preservation reimbursement currently is at 52%. We've seen that fluctuate year to year. We were at a low of 27%. Originally, as you know, it was supposed to be 100%. We have had, obviously, debate on as to how significantly we should prioritize local aid. That debate came to a head just recently in the Senate when we took up the most recent supplemental budget. And one of the things that I noted was that Treasurer Grossman had just testified before a joint revenue committee that lottery revenues are up 20 million over what they had anticipated and what we had budgeted for. And I suggested that 20 million go back to communities in the form of local aid. As you know, when we set up lottery, the intent was, and it was sold to the public, that was the bulk of that money was to go back to communities for local aid. And it was an interesting debate. The other side basically said that it wasn't an appropriate vehicle to advance that amendment. We should wait and take that up during discussion on the fiscal year 2015 budget this spring. Of course, by its definition, the supplemental budget is to deal with either account shortfalls or revenue surpluses in that current fiscal year, and these were surpluses in that current fiscal year. But I will revisit that again during budget debate in an attempt to see us get back some semblance of where we were in terms of our local aid numbers. I think that the partnership between state government and municipal government has been broken for a number of years now. And I think that we failed to prioritize local aid to the extent that we should. You know, we in some cases, we've dealt with surpluses with significant earmarks, and that's great. We can earmark, you know, some surplus monies for different town-specific projects, but I'd rather see the flexibility given to, you know, back to communities to do what they deem appropriate at the local level with local aid, and be more disciplined in what we do in terms of earmarking, and send it back in the form of additional local aid rather than take that surplus and earmark that. The next page, we talk about some of the good news for Cohasset, so that I'm not Mr. Doom and Gloom here. Talks about what we've done over the past year and what some of the grant funding has been. Obviously, as a member of the Transportation Committee, I did support the increase in Chapter 90 funding. We are at an all-time high in terms of Chapter 90 funding right now with the $200 million. Unfortunately, we took it to another level this past fiscal year, getting that number up to $300 million, which we appropriated through legislative process. And as you know, the governor has refused to release the additional $100 million. And there's reasons for that. We actually got into that a little in Hull, based on some questions Selectman asked, but the governor has chosen to prioritize other transportation capital spending projects over the release of this $100 million because they have bond cap concerns. It's interesting to note that this has been vetted not only by the Transportation Committee, but by we have a long-term debt and bonding committee that has looked at this also and feels that this is appropriate. The governor disagrees. He has prioritized projects like Fall River New Bedford rail restoration, which I personally don't think makes sense. I would rather see us prioritize this additional $100 million, go back to communities. As I drive around the South Shore, I noticed that we could probably stand to use, especially after this winter, some road improvement, additional road improvement funds. The other stuff that's on here, we talk about the SAFE grants and the CPA match. So that's kind of the overview. I know that flood insurance has been a significant issue for this county. I highlight some of the things we've been involved in on that particular issue. I've been trying to, and had a lengthy meeting last week with FEMA officials and with DCR officials to talk about the community rating system program. Hull has been able to participate, and as an example, Hull is participating, and that's meant a savings of about $350,000 for residents in Hull on their premiums in an aggregate way. And I tried to put in place during discussion on the supplemental budget a system by which DCI would be able to do some more outreach and coordinate with towns better to help towns take advantage of that. And it's interesting that only 15 communities right now are able to avail themselves of that program. And I know Cohasset is not one, but I hope that there'll be a little more assistance from the state to encourage and assist towns to participate in that, because there is a significant amount of savings to be had in communities that are impacted by especially by the new flood maps. Despite, even with the hopeful delay, hopefully the delay that we're going to have. And then, I won't get into it, but some of the other things that I've been involved in, and I will pick one out. It should be noted that your representative and I, along with then Representative Hines, were really the only people to go to. I think we had representatives from Cohasset at that time.
We did.
Join us, municipal officials from Cohasset, join us at Department of Education meeting to talk about where we were with the school building assistance program and how we felt that it is something that should be moved off of the state budget and rely on year-to-year appropriations to fund that program, which it had been since the 30s. And we filed legislation to try to accomplish that. The Romney administration then put in place its own reform measure before the legislature. The legislature reacted to that, came up with a plan, and set up the current program that we have. And it just celebrated its first milestone, I think, 10-year anniversary of the program being in place. And that has meant $300 million in assistance to communities that I represent. Certainly Cohasset has availed themselves of that. So we just put that in along with some of the other legislation relative to Cohasset. And I'll let you read those. I won't say what it is. Along with some others that were signed by the governor into law.
Thank you. Questions?
Well, I have a question on what's happening with chapter 9.
Oh, yes.
Your vote is tomorrow, Thursday night, isn't it?
Well, we have in place that we've already passed and authorized $300 million expenditure, and the governor has not released that additional $100 million, and that remains a point of contention. And I know that you're getting updated regularly from MMA.
Yes, I'm
Tomorrow-
on that committee.
Yes. Tomorrow, actually, what we're doing, and this is what you might be referring to, I think, we are, today, actually, the Senate Transportation Bond was released today. And that may be what you are
I know
referring
it's released today, and then to a committee, then Thursday you're gonna do the vote on it.
That is correct.
discussion.
That is correct. And Garrett can talk about what happened with that
Yeah,
bill
I'd
over
like
in the
to
House
know.
side. There are some things included in the Senate version that are relevant to Cohasset as of today. The $3 million plus on the 3A safety improvements are included. I won't have to offer an amendment to try to get that in. It's in the bill. And then we have a deadline tomorrow of 3 p.m. for amendments. I serve on that committee, as I mentioned.
Yeah.
So we've already solicited, I think, via email for any suggestions you have. And of course, we've taken many of the initiatives that communities provided, Representative Bradley, and we're including those as amendments that we'll file tomorrow.
Well, you got the MMA one, but we don't want the 5-year. That was, we talked to Senate, Brian Joyce, we gave him a bunch of stuff to him,
Yeah.
so.
And how did he do, including
He
them
was
in the
very
bill
well.
today?
Very well, he did very well. It was very good. We worked with, we try to do things agreeably. At least I try to. And there was no yelling or shouting or anything
Right.
like that.
And I mentioned earlier the $20 million amendment that they
yeah.
put forward on the lottery surplus funds.
Yeah.
I mentioned that because I don't think MMA got any information to you out about that. They
No,
unfortunately,
no.
unfortunately, they did not weigh in to members of the Senate about that amendment at that time,
That's interesting.
which puzzles,
Why is that?
which
Why?
you'd have to ask them. You
Yeah.
pay your dues. Good, it's a very good question. I'd like to know the answer.
Likewise, just a question. You were saying there were separate priorities for the Patrick administration of the $100 million for Chapter 90 money. And did I understand you correctly that the emphasis seems to be on New Bedford Fall River Rail restoration?
Well, I cite that as one example. I mean, they've put forward their transportation plan. That's out there, it's in writing, and one of the reasons why the governor feels that they can't afford to release this $100 million is because it conflicts where they are overall with the state's bond cap, with their state spending plan for all transportation moving pieces.
I would imagine if there's a real concern, a true concern about long-term expenditures by way of bonding, the one thing you'd want is to get the most out of the assets that you already have, right?
I would believe so.
The
yeah.
House and the Senate
So-
is on record indicating that the administration should release the full $100
No,
million.
I understand. So next time it
Bipartisan
comes up from the
consensus.
administration, just ask them if you run the choo-choos on the regular schedule, including on the weekends, because if you shut them down a third of the potential operating hours, you just don't get a lot out of the assets. And that really is a bigger waste of money.
Well, you make a good point, and part of the problem, getting in and looking at the MBTA situation, they're carrying $8.5 billion indebtedness, bigger than any transit authority on the face of the earth. That's impacting their operational deficit, their structural deficit that they have. And part of that comes from not only on the indebtedness side, but the massive capital expansion they've undertaken. And remember, MBTA operations, they only derive a third of their revenues from the fare box. The rest comes through assessments and, in recent years, the bailouts that we've provided and
Right.
pools of other money. And with that expansion came increased operational deficits. Greenbush is costing them, prior to the elimination of weekend service, their subsidy on Greenbush is $25 million a year. Now you're talking, and that's for a very small, short line. Now you're talking about a massive rail construction, rail project to Fall River to Bedford.
Right.
Forget the construction cost. As I said at a hearing with Secretary Davey, and leading up to that point, I've asked year after year after year, what is the operational subsidy you'll expect with Fall River and New Bedford? They don't give it to you. I finally got an answer about a year and a half ago. My question was, if the Tooth Fairy gave you $2 billion to build it, what's the operational subsidy? They came up with a number of $40 million. And that's on top of $180 million
Is that in
a year,
perpetuity, or is it, yeah?
Yeah, that's what it costs you.
based on ridership projections. And the ridership projections are suspect. And you ask, well, where is that money gonna come from at a time when the T comes to the legislature for a bailout on $180 million year-to-year, in recent years, operational deficit, and they give you a cockamamie answer like, well, we're gonna earmark part of the revenues from new growth to pay for that line. New growth. I don't know what that means.
Is there-
I know what it means, but I don't think it'll be realized.
Right.
From a realistic perspective, because, essentially the funds come from all over the state, certainly not just for the people who are served by the T. What capability do you have in the House, Garrett, do you have in the Senate, Bob, to begin to put the squeeze together such that there is some logic that comes back to this? And I ask the question because, frankly, the community, as you know, was relatively deeply split and evenly split when the rail line was built. But now it bisects the town. It actually has an impact on public safety here. Yet at the same time, there have been benefits. Not the least of them is that the folks that live in this community and every community along the rail line had weekend access to Boston that never existed prior, at least on a public basis. Yet that was just arbitrarily shut down. It was shut down here, not necessarily every other line. I recognize that there's a quote-unquote financial decision in that, but really if there's a financial decision that would need to take place, I think you'd have to look at the entire operation and say, shouldn't it be completely overhauled? So, and that's why I ask, what is it that you, and I ask this genuinely because I recognize that it's an administration, if I remember correctly, right?
It's the direction of whether or not to do it
Authority,
has
it's an authority.
been set by this current administration. Obviously, there are funding sources that would have to come through both the House and Senate if and when we get to that point. It's still in, quite frankly, the conceptual stage. I think it really depends on who the next governor is. It's not something that's gonna get started and certainly not completed under this particular administration. It's just, the idea, public transportation is never gonna make a profit. It's the idea to move people in and out of the economic centers of the state. And I could get, even though Bob and I were both opposed to the Greenbush line restoration, I could get the thinking, significant amount of folks in this region commute to Boston for work. I don't think that's necessarily the case where this particular line is going. I don't think
Right.
people move to New Bedford thinking, great, I can access Boston now. I mean, I think
Right.
that, so I think,
I mean, you didn't hear the governor,
bridge
in
to
his State of the
nowhere.
State speech, he came up with this mythical guy who worked in the Innovation District
well,
and
listen,
wanted to
there
buy
are,
a cheap home in New Bedford. I don't know too many young urban professionals that work in the Innovation District that wanna take a lengthy train ride every day. It didn't make any sense when I heard that, but
well,
it sounded good anyway, but I don't know.
so to answer your question, there are things that we can do. We're not at that point right now. But I think it really, whether or not that project goes forward is gonna have to be set by a governor who comes in, and he or she says, this is a project I'm gonna do, and I'm gonna do it by, the end of my 4 years. Or I'm not gonna do it. And that's kind of what happened with the stops and starts at Greenbush until finally it was determined after successful governor, we're doing this.
No, I understand that, and by the way, I recognize that something like public transportation
No, I know you do.
Doesn't necessarily become self-supporting, but at the same time, to support a third of your operations and look to the rest of the state to pick up the remainder is so far out of whack as to not be funny. Having said that, I appreciate the fact that you recognize both the potential and the impact that this particular line has had on the town, and it'll come up again, I'm sure. The other question I had for you was with regard to OPEB, and that's just very simply, what initiatives are taking place in either the House or the Senate to assist communities, obviously we're concerned with ours, but to assist communities in dealing with the OPEB liability that I think just about everybody faces,
Including the state.
including the state.
Yeah, I mean, I think which we tried to give, what was the savings that, I think if we look back on, the changes we made in regards to communities' healthcare costs, and I think that saved about 200 million right now across the state. There is a bill that was filed, a commission that came back, the governor had filed it, it was not unanimous. The union representatives did not agree, which would basically overhaul and change the way pensions are funded, healthcare costs are funded. That is just in the infancy, moving through the legislative process. I think that's really the vehicle that you would see us, the House and the Senate, doing something by. Whether or not that's something that gets addressed in this session or the next, I can't predict at this point. It has not just been discharged from the committee. So it's, all of these issues are like not to get back to our last metaphor, are like a train coming down the tracks. We all see it. It's on the statewide level, it's on the local level. Certainly significant pressure is being put on communities. We have tried to do some things over the last few sessions. I think that bill is probably the next vehicle, but it's something that I wouldn't be surprised if you saw it released and discussed, but probably dealt with in the next legislative session.
Well, is there a specific OPEB committee, legislative committee, or is it in another?
No, it was a commission that the governor had established that came back and made
With that report.
recommendation, and then it was put into a form of a bill.
Okay, and then where does that bill sit right now?
That is in the, it's the municipalities and.
Sitting in
Okay.
committee, and that,
Sitting in committee.
Right.
and I
We
think,
know.
your representative on Beacon Hill MMA was not happy with the, commission's.
They were the only ones on the commission that disagreed with it, because they
Right.
didn't feel like it went far
Not that
enough.
it's relevant to anything, but I
Right.
was actually on vacation in Florida, and ran into Ralph White and Sean Duhamel of the Retirees Association at
Yeah.
the precise moment that Sean got his update that the commission was having its press conference to announce that the commission was filing its report on that,
Right.
and its recommendations. It was very strange. Can't get away from it sometimes.
No.
But in answer to the first part of Selectman Gomer's question about the transportation piece, I would just add that it's and just disagree with Garrett a little bit about it's in conceptual form. That may be true to a degree, but we are spending money on that concept right now to keep it alive, if you will. And remember, this has been alive since 1990, and Republican governors, Democrat governors have made promises to that region that I question their ability to fulfill. But to keep that promise alive, we're spending money. And while we're upset with the governor for not releasing that additional $100 million in Chapter 90, we have given him the ability to frustrate us by authorizing the administration a heck of a lot more transportation-related projects than they have the ability to fund. So we've given him that maneuverability, despite the fact, we say we'd like to prioritize that $100 million and see that released, but through our actions, we haven't prioritized it because you'll see tomorrow, and I think, and I can't speak for the House version, but I think in the House version, there's a lot of language that authorizes a lot of money to be spent on Fall River, New Bedford, and you're gonna see that tomorrow. You see it today with the bill that we released. There's tens of millions and hundreds of millions of dollars in authorizations to go forward on that line. So we're giving that wiggle room to the governor, unfortunately.
There's a question I wanna ask you. Did you, Dick Crone, was a member of the committee
Yeah.
years ago. he had petitions at various towns, and he's going before the boards that we want to have that weekend service, and
Right.
also expand the weekday to 11, so people can use it for ball games and whatever. And actually what it does, what it hurt us this summer, is that we're a summer community and with the beach, and a lot of people used to come down, and a lot of the citizens, I had people that came down, family and so forth, they couldn't come on the weekend because they worked during the week. And I found that I myself have gotten a lot of complaints about that. Where was the train? I said, did they cut it? And they were mad at the governor. I said, write the governor. So I don't know what they did.
Two things on that. Number one, the T was very clear when they proposed Greenbush how late it would run and what the schedule
I
would
know,
be.
yeah.
And so we knew that. As far as weekend service, Mr. Prone makes some very good recommendations and suggestions, especially things like parking, okay? It's an archaic parking system
That's
right
right.
now. It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't encourage
Folding
use.
dollars.
Well, I don't even mean the mechanics, but I've had people weigh in with us, and we were actually supposed to have a hearing on this down here. It was promised over a year ago. It hasn't materialized yet from the chairman of transportation. But I've had people tell me just recently. Someone from Hull said I would have used it to go to the airport, but they're going to ticket my car the next day. I want to be able to leave it there
That's right.
long
Yeah,
term.
a
And you know
weekend,
what?
yeah.
We have the capacity. If you go up and look at
Yeah.
Tasket Junction, that supposedly services people from Hull. I mean, it's minuscule the amount of cars that are
That's
there.
right.
It's empty. It's a ghost town. The other part of the equation is we had the service running, and we know what the numbers were. And I know one of my colleagues, Garrett's colleagues in the House, is talking about a study. The ridership data that's available for us to look at is pretty clear.
You're losing money running.
Forget
More
losing
than
money.
you would anticipate.
Forget losing money. If you contrast what the T proposed and what their environmental impact report talked about in terms of ridership, and what the reality is, and I was a Greenbush critic, but even I thought the train would be full. I just didn't think even full it made sense for a whole host of reasons, which I won't revisit. But the fact is, we're even below what the T's projections were. Okay, we're below ridership estimates, and the key figure that the T had was 50% of riders would come off existing forms of mass transportation. That's 62%. All we've done is cannibalize the boats. Now when we had the hearings and the T had to look at service cutbacks because of this structural deficit we have, what did they do? They basically eliminated the subsidy for the commuter boats, and they're at a market rate right now. So we're really not providing any significant support to the commuter boats. We eliminate the weekend service, and the T was up front. They said, we're looking at, everything's on the table, service and fares. We had a modest increase in fares system-wide, a huge increase for the commuter boats, and cutbacks in service. And the fact is that the ridership numbers were weak for the whole line, but they're even worse on the weekend. I mean, it was a ghost train. Now, if Mr. Prone has ideas, and look, I want to advocate for my towns, and I want to make the service more convenient, but I also sometimes like to look at the big picture. And if he's got some ideas that are going to encourage ridership, and it makes sense to revisit it, I'm all for it. But
Just as
the
an
proof
aside.
to date suggests that people just weren't using it on the weekend. And Garrett uses the train more than I do, or used to,
Yeah, I do.
till he got his new car, on the weekdays. Well, I used to see his old car. I used to see where it was parked.
I got rid of it so you couldn't spy on me.
Spy on him. You know what he used to do? He used to back it in closest to the street so people would see the bumper sticker as they drove by. It wasn't like spying. He was advertising himself. Why don't you just put a sign on the roof that said, I ride Greenbush? Anyway, I know he knows, anecdotally speaking, what the ridership situation was during the week. And weekends, I mean, I drive by a couple of stations on a regular basis. And the Jackson Square station, which is a pretty busy station, my anecdotal evidence suggests that I never saw a car there on the weekend.
Well,
I
you
never
s-
saw more than 3 cars in there on
You
the
should
weekend.
be able to allow them to park it over the weekend and go away. You
I-
gotta have
I
long-term
agree, that
memory.
makes sense. I
And
totally
that may
agree.
be one of the things that would increase it,
Yeah,
and we're
well,
happy
that's one
to
of the
look at it,
things
but the
Paul
data
talked
there
about.
just was
He's
very difficult
argued
to
that
support.
too. He's
Just-
argued that. I
Just
mean,
as
I
an
have,
aside, first of all, if either of you have ridden the boats in the past 2 years, you'll find that whatever ridership data you're getting, suspect it thoroughly. Standing room only.
Yeah.
Okay?
On the boats, yeah.
By the way, it's
Oh, yeah.
standing room only, and you pay $262 a month.
Correct.
Right.
Okay, so, if cost is an issue, it's very clear that there's a preference, and people will actually lay out more to use that service, because it's, number one, it's dependable. I've never seen the tracks freeze on the boat. I've never had a switch delay on the boat, and they're always on time. Now, that's service. My point earlier was that the tracks and the train itself, whether or not you loved it or you hated it, it's a living memorial to a $400 million expenditure, all right? And taxpayers look, I know, that's the headline number. But fair enough, I'll take the number as large as you like, but the point is, once you're getting into all those zeros, we all look at it collectively and recognize that we paid for it, but it doesn't do anything, and it's not going away, okay? It's given us chain link, it's given us cement, it's given us paved spaces, and right now it's not giving us service.
This town has 6 crossings, 2
Yeah,
street crossings.
and it has the great potential to thoroughly delay our emergency response across sections of town, and of course, with those grade crossings, it creates the potential for hazard. So my point in all of that is the very same thing. Look, we respect the numbers, we understand the issue, but we also expect a great deal from our leadership, as people do from here. So if we're gonna spend $500 million on something, could we please be certain that it's gonna get used? Otherwise, I really don't wanna hear about whether or not we got too much long-term
Yeah,
debt,
well,
because I can see it.
It does get, well, let's just be clear. During the week, Monday to Friday, the train, especially in the winter, the train is very full. I ride it.
I do too.
It's packed. The question really is on the weekend, and as the senator said, we all knew the time it was gonna stop at night. But nothing is set in stone, and as things evolve, and now we're trying to, with our transportation reform, we've tried to shore up the finances of the T and asked that we look at doing some of this. And they are trying to get creative. They ran the train down towards Cape Cod a little bit last year as a test. So I think there are things that we can do.
At a market rate.
And, yeah, no, I understand. I think there are things that we can do, but it's not as though it's, it's rattling up and down here 12 times a day and nobody's using it.
No,
In
that wasn't-
response,
that's
in
not the
response,
point.
in response real quick to that, number one, it's packed because they are not running as many cars as they indicated that they would in the EIR, so
Was it 8 down to 5, I think?
something like that,
Right.
number one. Number two,
Yeah.
the fact is ridership is down on the Hingham Ferry service, it is a fact. What they've done is they've altered the schedule, number one. Ridership growth is up on the Hull service, which is why we see that empty parking lot at Nantasket Junction. It just didn't catch on with Hull residents while the boat has caught on. Also, you have the elimination of the Quincy service, and they've got more of an economy of scale by moving that over to Hingham. So you've got less boats, less of a schedule, and I think that's why. The data suggests, or the data indicates, not suggests, it indicates that ridership is down based on the amount of fares, number one. Number two, we just did a parking lot analysis down there because the shipyard developers want to revisit that. And they want some changes made in their arrangement with the T, and the number of spaces being utilized on a daily basis is down from where they were, which lends itself to the data on the ridership analysis of Greenbush that, it cannibalized boat users. So it is down, and I think what you see is a function of scheduling issues.
Maybe, but I've noticed the trend over a 2-year basis, which didn't include Quincy, but, my point is that.
And
there's
that
an
service isn't coming back, unfortunately. That's some bad news for the region. That was a great compliment, I think.
Yes, it
And
was.
the T has now indicated that they're gonna sell the pier there and just walk away from that completely.
Really?
I think we need a governor down the South Shore, and then we'd have everything. But I wanna correct the cost, the
How it works.
400,000, it actually
You mean
would have
living in
been
Lennox doesn't work for
200,000.
us?
We hadn't had 29 lawsuits by the people in Hingham, and that's why the cost went up.
Talking about me, Bob, that's not
Yeah.
for you.
Loving it your way.
Well, I sat in a meeting with the then mayor of Weymouth during that period, and he said, we don't wanna ask for too much, cause we like the project and we don't wanna make the cost
Yeah, I know.
unwieldy. That was an interesting negotiating stance
I
when it comes to
found
mitigation.
the other day, an old clipping on it, on Hingham. Remember, the Globe called Hingham people drinking tea, coffee, and laughing.
Brian
I'll-
McGrory.
Yeah, Brian McGrory, and I'll Xerox it and send it to you guys.
Just so we can revisit
For
it.
deja vu.
Yes.
I have a totally different kind of question, which is probably rhetorical and it's very macro. One of the things that we spent our first almost hour here tonight talking about was our budget for FY15, and and we're having to rely on revenue projections in order to build a sustainable budget for next year. And and then I hear that you're gonna be talking about it at the end of April, beginning of May. Senate's not even gonna be discussing it till Memorial Day, and we're not gonna really know what kind of money we're getting from the state until July. But
When you
we
see
gotta
the
pass a
Senate and the
budget in
House
April.
numbers,
Yeah.
it'll be some, if we're at 5% and they're at 7, it's gonna, those your floor and ceiling.
You kinda
Right.
right.
But, that's between April and Memorial Day, which doesn't
Right, and
help
all
you as
the,
you're
all the
drafting your budget.
communities are
No, I
doing,
understand.
have town meeting at the end of April, so I don't know whether there's ever been, or, and I know the MMA pushes this too, but just if there's ever any movement among you all to try to get some more actual numbers realized earlier in the process.
And that's the local aid resolution I was speaking about.
Right.
In years past, when we have been able to come to a consensus to say, no matter what the House and the Senate do, we're all gonna agree on this number.
Right.
It has been, for whatever reason, difficult to do over the last few years because revenue has been, down, and
Yes.
therefore priorities
All
in
over
each
the
branch and the administration gets strayed in different areas and strained. So, that is the way around that, Diane. Unfortunately, we haven't been able to do that, so that's why we come here, to try to give you the best information we have. Not all legislators do this,
Right.
but I think it's important to be here, so when you're sitting back saying, how am I gonna go to town meeting, I don't have any information from the
Right.
state, we try to give you the most we know it's not an exact science.
Right,
And other than a local aid resolution, I don't see any other way to do it.
right. It
I'll
is
try
an
to be
election year,
diplomatic
isn't
here,
it?
Diane, I'll try to
This is
be.
an election year, that's
Yes,
why
thank
you're
you.
gonna see more local aid than the governor put in.
Okay, this is, I talked about some of the negative aspects of what the trend lines have been on local aid and everything, and sounded a little bit doom and gloom, but I think it's outrageous. We can see the leadership agree on a budget number, they get a budget consensus number, but can't agree on a early local aid resolution. I don't understand it. It doesn't make, it's not right, and I think that's just an abandonment of this partnership that I've implied
I agree.
in my presentation. There's
Yeah.
no, especially when you consider the growth in revenues the last few years. I know we have built-in costs, and I know we're doing some positive things with some of that surplus.
Not only the growth in revenue, but the absolute needs, and we just got a healthcare number that's gonna be 10%. I mean, it just, the costs are just like this, and they're just squeezing to the very edges, and so to have reliable numbers really helps, cause then earlier in the conversation, we can say, we're not gonna get there, but we don't really know where we're gonna get, so, anyway. Thank you.
Congress is voting tomorrow on the FEMA stuff.
Yes.
FEMA expansion of the houses.
One thing Chris and I were talking about, and a few other people, a possibility of doing some maps to kind of like present a case, and I know I attended Congressman Lynch's time at Hingham Town Hall, where a lot of people from more of your other communities came, and it's not a big deal in Cohasset, but we do still have some areas that are low. Are any communities banding together to work on this mapping thing?
It's been kind of willy-nilly, to be honest with you. As you know, we impacted the situation here in Plymouth County with some of the information that came forward through the folks that Congressman Keating reached out to, what Marshfield did. and
That was a
actually-
discovery, they're using Pacific.
Actually, you know, I just, it
Ocean
dawned on me,
data,
we're
right?
sitting in Norfolk County here, I know.
That's
you've-
right,
you've
we're
got-
weird.
Yeah, but, obviously, what happens tomorrow will impact the situation. But we still haven't seen the last of this issue as we see, more of the maps unveiled nationally and the impacts thereof.
Yeah, I think if there is a delay, I think that there is an opportunity to reach out to some other communities. I know that, there's some folks in Quincy who aren't happy that the mayor had taken a pass on, doing that. So perhaps there are communities that have pockets, can come together, and try to work on something collectively, and certainly can follow up with Chris and, put
Great.
him in touch with some folks
And-
in our sister communities. Yes, Diane?
No, I just wondered, there was something in the legislation, or at least I think when Congressman Lynch was talking about it a couple months ago, that would necessitate some kind of remapping, but wouldn't that be done at the federal level? Or
Yeah,
are you
well-
kinda talking more of an advocacy?
Well, the
And
community
it's-
setting an alternate
Communities
case,
can
yeah.
appeal the maps
Yeah.
and can ask that they be redrawn, can
I
ask
see.
that they.
Have an expert.
But you
but-
need to-
Yeah, but you have to, it costs money.
Right.
So what I think Fred is referring to, if you have a community like Cohasset where it's not as huge of an issue as say Hull or Marshfield or Situate, perhaps it would be
We
able
band
to
with-
regionally band together with communities to spread those costs out and still, try to effectuate some change.
Would-
I think we should wait and see what Congress does.
Yeah.
obviously.
Yeah.
Wouldn't Congress like to do it in regional bundles more than individual? I don't know how they operate down there.
I, no idea how you operate
I don't
that.
think they know.
You mean FEMA?
Yeah.
FEMA, well, I mean, they have taken that approach.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the way
Well,
that they're,
ask
well, that's the
for
way they're
change.
unveiling it, but,
Yeah, I know.
but in terms of a regional approach, I mean, we've already determined that their modeling is flawed when they use
I-
Pacific Coast modeling for
I
the
know
Atlantic
that.
Ocean,
I know
things
that.
like that. I mean, the
Yeah.
process has been disproven. I mean, and there's been now concessions on the part of FEMA recognizing those flaws where initially in this process, they were dug in. And of course, now they're obviously reading the
trying
tea
to
leaves that Congress is poised
They're
to
trying to
act.
save money to use something that's been done and put it on our side, probably.
Yeah, I mean, the assumptions are absurd when you look at those assumptions and how it impacts people here on the South Shore, people who have never had a claim, you know, that aren't anywhere near a major body of water. I mean, it's
Yep.
crazy.
Well, that's the same thing as now what they're doing with the chapter 90, requiring us to have a 5-year plan, which they never had before. And, we think the group thought it was gonna be mandatory then. And they don't like it, they don't like it.
Well, back to Diane, you know, you spurred a thought, this was put on the table by a candidate for office, I won't get partisan and say who it is, but, you know, they've suggested that we implement a 2-year, schedule for local aid. And we wouldn't be talking about whether or not we have an early local aid resolution and give you some more certainty, and I think that's a good idea. And I think we have the ability to do it now, from a budget standpoint. I mean, obviously circumstances could change, but I think that that's something that we could possibly, could achieve and-
Yeah.
and accomplish and make it a reality, but.
But don't you legally have to have a budget each year? Is it in statute?
You would have to have, yeah, we have to have a budget, and we have to have a balanced budget.
Yeah.
I think and I applaud the person for raising the issue of trying to get some continuity of communities. The problem then becomes, and I'm not saying you shouldn't, I certainly think we should look at it. We could certainly tell you what it's going to be,
Yeah.
but that doesn't mean that we couldn't change it if something
Yeah,
happened.
yeah.
And I think that's where we get into some trouble is if we tell you what your number is for 2 years and we come back and or if we get, well, we can always send you more money, but if you have a downturn in the economy, it doesn't take long for the revenue to start to drop and we come back and we try to pull that back, that gets a little harder.
I think
on you.
local officials recognize that circumstances can change, and they know we have that ability to react. I mean, we change things all the time, as you know.
But if we were to do it it would be a much more uncomfortable meeting
we're having here tonight if.
We had a 2-year local aid, we came to tell you it was
Yeah,
changed,
yeah,
but
that's
I'm not
fine.
saying.
I'd
don't.
rather
I
see
think
us
it's
make,
something
I'd
to
rather
do.
see us make that attempt, though,
No,
that's just my
I'm
point.
not saying don't do it, I'm
Yeah.
just saying that it does have,
That's a
it does have
caveat.
some drawbacks, but to your question of whether or not, could we do it, sure, we could do it, it would just be based off of projections.
I think revisiting the issue would be less painful than coming here as we do now, and telling you we can't even get our act together to give you an early local aid resolution.
Something that we have to pass in, 6 weeks, right?
Anything else?
No, thank you, Mark,
Gentlemen,
very much.
thank you very much.
Anytime.
Thank you.
Good to see you guys.
Same here. Okay, where were we? At the minutes?
Minutes.
February 12th.
Speech,
Any other changes on February 12th?
I'll move them.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, 5-0. February 25th.
Tracy, great job with the minutes.
Yeah.
Yeah, you do a very good job.
It's come very far. It's very much appreciated.
Thank you.
And it's the next week.
Is that a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Further discussion, all those in favor?
Aye.
5-0. Okay, next meetings of the Board of Selectmen on March 18th, 20th, 25th, April 1st, 15th, 22nd, and May 6th.
Get friendly.
We don't have any, need for a meeting next week,
No.
and I mean,
Yeah. what do we
Tuesday
have
is not
next week? We have
possible, but
the
we
Tuesday
talked about
night.
maybe.
Well, didn't we settle on the 20th or something because nobody could make it?
Yeah.
Oh, all right,
Yeah,
okay.
we-
You're right,
Yeah.
there's 2 in 1
Yeah,
week.
Yeah,
You're right, thank you.
yeah, it was a tough week next week, probably.
And I gave
on the
you,
20th.
the copy of the MOU for a new senior center, since it started.
It's a handout on your table.
Handout,
this
Right. Thank
morning,
you.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, topics not reasonably anticipated by the chairman. I have none. Anybody have anything?
Nope.
Motion to adjourn?
Yeah.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor? Aye.
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 Opposed? Thank you.